This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't shake what happened to me about 7 months ago. Even typing this makes my hands tremble a bit. I'm a systems analyst and single dad to my 6-year-old daughter Anna. After my wife passed away 3 years ago, I've been raising Anna on my own in Pineville. It's this small town where everyone pretty much knows everyone. My company's been super flexible with me working from home during evenings. This arrangement lets me be there for Anna's bedtime routine, bath time, story time, the whole deal. She usually falls asleep around 9, and I start my shift at 10, working until around 6 in the morning. It's not ideal, but it works for us. So anyway, on May 4th, I remember the date because it was the day before I was supposed to take Anna to this carnival she'd been excited about for weeks. I was sitting at my desk in the living room. It was around 11 at night. Anna was asleep in her bedroom upstairs, and I was knee-deep in debugging this program that had been giving me hell all week. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, but I still heard this frantic knocking at my front door. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Who the hell visits at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday? The knocking came again, more urgent this time. I have this doorbell camera that connects to an app on my phone. I installed it after moving here because, even though Pineville is supposed to be safe, being a single dad makes you paranoid about everything. I checked the app and saw this young woman standing on my porch. She couldn't have been more than 17 or 18. What really got to me was how terrified she looked, shaking, constantly looking over her shoulder, hugging herself like she was freezing, even though it was a mild spring night. She leaned closer to the camera and whispered something I couldn't quite make out. I turned up the volume and heard her say, "Please help me. This man's been following me for blocks. I think he's going to hurt me, please." My heart started racing. I've got a daughter, you know. All I could think was, what if this was Anna in 10 years, scared and alone, needing someone to help her? What kind of person would I be if I just ignored this girl? I went downstairs to the front door but kept the chain lock on as I opened it just enough to see her face. Up close, she looked even worse, pale as a ghost, breathing like she'd just run a marathon, eyes wide with panic. "He's been following me since I got off the bus," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't live around here. I was visiting my friend and missed the last bus home. This car started following me, and then this guy got out and started walking behind me. Please, can I come in and call my dad?" I hesitated for just a second, not because I didn't want to help, but because I had Anna upstairs. But the girl looked so genuinely terrified that I unhooked the chain and let her in. She practically fell through the doorway. I quickly locked the door behind her and led her to the living room. "Thank you," she whispered, collapsing onto my couch. "Thank you so much." I was about to ask if she wanted some water when there was another knock at the door, harder this time, more demanding. My stomach dropped. I went back to check my doorbell camera and saw 3 men standing on my porch. They were all wearing dark hooded jackets that partially obscured their faces. The one in front was maybe in his 20s, with this intense look in his eyes that made my skin crawl. "Hey man," he said, looking directly into the camera. "We just need some directions. Our car broke down up the road." The girl had followed me to the hallway. When she saw the men on my phone screen, she gasped and grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. "That's them," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Those are the men who were following me. Please don't let them in. Please." I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. My first thought was Anna sleeping upstairs completely. Vulnerable. I needed to get this situation under control fast. "I've called the police," I lied loudly toward the door. "They're on their way now." The knocking stopped for a moment, then came back even harder, making the door rattle in its frame. "We just need to use your phone, man," the guy said, his voice harder now. "Our car broke down. Don't be an asshole." "I said the police are on their way," I repeated, trying to sound confident despite the fear building in my chest. "You need to leave my property now." The girl was practically hyperventilating behind me. I turned to tell her it would be okay when I felt something crack against the back of my head. The pain was instant and blinding, like someone had set off a firecracker inside my skull. I staggered forward, my vision swimming. Through the haze, I saw the girl standing there, holding what looked like the heavy marble bookend from my side table. Her face had completely changed. The fear was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating look that didn't belong on a teenager. "What?" was all I managed to say before my legs gave out. As I collapsed to the floor, I heard the sound of my front door being unlocked and opened. The last thing I remember before everything went black was multiple sets of footsteps entering my home and someone saying, "Check upstairs." Anna. They were going to find Anna. I don't know how long I was out. Could have been minutes or hours. I came to gradually, the pain in my head pulsing with each heartbeat. I was lying face down on my living room floor, a small puddle of blood beneath my head. My first coherent thought was Anna. I tried to stand up but immediately fell back down, a wave of nausea washing over me. The room was spinning and there was this high-pitched ringing in my ears. I crawled to the staircase, pulling myself up the steps one by one, fighting through the dizziness and pain. When I finally reached Anna's room, I was terrified of what I might find. I pushed open her door with shaking hands, and the relief that washed over me when I saw her still sleeping peacefully in her bed nearly made me pass out again. They hadn't touched her. Thank God they hadn't touched her. I collapsed next to her bed, listening to her soft breathing for a moment before forcing myself back downstairs to assess the damage. My living room was completely destroyed. Every drawer had been pulled out and emptied, cushions slashed open, electronics gone. My work laptop, the TV, Anna's tablet, all taken. The front door was standing wide open, letting in the cool night air. I stumbled to my phone, which they'd surprisingly left behind, probably because it was an older model not worth stealing, and called 911. The operator kept asking me questions I couldn't focus on answering. All I kept saying was, "They were in my house. My daughter is here." The police arrived about 15 minutes later. They searched the house, took my statement, photographed everything. One officer sat with me at my kitchen table as I held an ice pack to the back of my head, trying to make sense of what had happened. "You're lucky, Mr. Vega," he said, his voice grave. "We've seen this scheme before in neighboring counties. They send in someone who appears vulnerable, usually a young woman or a kid, to scope out the house and let the others in. Most of the time, the homeowners are tied up, sometimes worse." "But they didn't take anything from upstairs," I said, still trying to understand. "They left all of Anna's things alone." The officer shrugged. "They were probably looking for cash, jewelry, electronics, things they could grab quickly and sell easily. Once they got what they wanted from downstairs, they might have heard the sirens and booked it. But I hadn't called the police until after I checked on Anna. Something about the whole situation felt off, but my head was throbbing too much to think clearly. They took me to the hospital for a CT scan, which showed a mild concussion, but nothing more serious. By the time we got home, it was nearly morning. Anna woke up confused about why there were police officers in our house. I told her there had been a break-in, but that we were safe now. She seemed to accept this explanation with the simple trust of a child. The police never caught them. They found fingerprints that didn't match any in their system, and my doorbell camera footage wasn't clear enough to make out distinct facial features of the men. The girl, though, her face was perfectly visible, but they couldn't find any match for her either. I've installed a security system since then. New locks, motion sensors, the works. I don't open my door after dark anymore, no matter what. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the sound of those footsteps coming up my stairs toward Anna's room. What keeps me up at night isn't just what happened, it's what could have happened. Why did they leave Anna alone? Why did they only take things from downstairs? The officers suggested they were scared off, but something tells me there's more to it. Sometimes I wonder if they were looking for something specific, something they thought I had, and that girl, the way her face changed when she hit me. It wasn't just that she'd been acting scared, it was like she became a completely different person. I keep thinking about how easily I let her in, how quickly I fell for her story because she seemed so genuinely terrified. I consider myself a good judge of character. I've worked with all kinds of people over the years, but I didn't see through her act for a second. Not 1 second. And that scares me more than anything else, how completely I was fooled by someone who meant to do us harm. I still live in the same house. We couldn't afford to move, and I didn't want to uproot Anna from her school and friends. But I've never felt safe here again. Every creak in the night, every unexpected sound has me reaching for my phone to check the security cameras. I try to tell myself that lightning doesn't strike twice, that we're safer now with all the new security measures. But deep down, I know the truth. The moment I opened that door, I showed them exactly how to get to me, through my compassion, through my desire to help someone I thought was vulnerable. And I can't help but wonder if someday they'll try again. Story 2. I've lived in Pinheiral all my life. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and crime is something that happens in the big cities, not here. At 62, I've worked as a welder for almost 40 years, raised 3 kids who've all moved away to São Paulo and Rio, and spent 36 years married to my Maria before cancer took her 5 years ago. Our house sits on about 2 hectares of land that's been in Maria's family for generations. It's too big for just me now, but I could never sell it. Too many memories in these walls. I've got my routine, work at the metalworking shop in town during the day, come home to Bolota, my mixed breed dog who's been my shadow since Maria passed, make a simple dinner and take a walk around the property before turning in. Bolota and I have been doing fine on our own. I'm not one of those old men who can't take care of himself. I keep the place clean, cook my meals, maintain the yard. The only room I don't touch is the master bedroom upstairs. After Maria died, I moved my things to the downstairs guest room. Couldn't bear sleeping in our bed without her. I closed the door and left everything exactly as it was the day she went to the hospital for the last time. What happened started about 3 weeks ago. I'd just gotten home from work, tired from a big job welding support beams for a new shopping center going up in Volta Redonda. I remember it was a Wednesday because I'd picked up fresh bread on the way home like I always do midweek. After dinner, Bolota and I took our usual walk around the property. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. I was checking the fencing near the back of the property when something caught my eye. Movement in the upstairs window, the master bedroom window. I stopped dead in my tracks. I'm not imagining things. There was definitely something moving up there, a shadow passing by the window. My first thought was a burglar, but who would break in at sunset? And why the upstairs bedroom when there's nothing valuable there? Bolota, vamos, I called, and we hurried back to the house. My heart was pounding as I grabbed the old baseball bat I keep by the door. I checked the locks, all secure. Nothing seemed disturbed downstairs. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment, just listening. Silence. I climbed the stairs slowly, each wooden step creaking under my weight. The hallway was dark, and the door to the master bedroom was closed, just as it always is. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. I hadn't opened this door in years. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Maria's hairbrush on the dresser, her reading glasses folded beside the bed, a thin layer of dust covering everything. The curtains were still, the window locked from the inside. I checked the closet, under the bed, behind the door. Nothing. I must have imagined it, I told myself. Maybe it was just a reflection, or a bird flying past. I closed the door again and went downstairs, feeling foolish but still uneasy. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every creak of the old house made me jerk awake. Bolota seemed restless too, getting up several times to pace around my bedroom before settling back down with a heavy sigh. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. Jorge, my boss for 20 years, asked if I was feeling all right after I messed up measurements on a simple job. I blamed it on not sleeping well, which wasn't a lie. That second night, I double-checked all the doors and windows before going to bed. I even pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door, feeling silly as I did it, but unable to shake the uneasiness. I must have fallen asleep eventually because Bolota's growling woke me up. It was the middle of the night. My clock read 2:15. Bolota was standing at my bedroom door, hackles raised, growling low in her throat. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps directly above my head, in the master bedroom. My mouth went dry. There was someone in my house, moving around in Maria's room. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, but stopped. What if they heard me calling the police? What if they came downstairs before help arrived? I moved the dresser as quietly as I could and grabbed the bat I'd left leaning against the wall. Bolota was still growling, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Shh," I whispered, patting her head. "Stay." I crept out into the hallway. The footsteps continued overhead, slow, measured steps, back and forth, like someone pacing. I climbed the stairs, trying to avoid the steps that creaked the worst. My hands were slick with sweat around the bat. At the top of the stairs, I paused. The footsteps had stopped. The door to the master bedroom was closed. I stood there, listening, my heart hammering so loud I was sure whoever was in there could hear it. Nothing. Complete silence. Finally, I gathered my courage and threw the door open, raising the bat. Empty. The room was completely empty, just as it had been the day before. The bed was undisturbed, the closet door closed, the window locked. Nothing had been moved or touched. I checked everywhere, under the bed, in the closet, the attached bathroom. Nothing. No sign anyone had been there at all. I sat down heavily on Maria's side of the bed, the bat across my knees. Had I imagined the footsteps? Was I losing my mind? I went back downstairs, where Bolota was waiting anxiously at the bottom of the stairs. She'd heard it too. I wasn't. Crazy. Someone had been up there. But how had they gotten in? And more importantly, how had they gotten out? I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, Bolota curled up against my leg, the bat in my hand, until morning came. The third night, I was determined to catch whoever was playing games with me. I came home from work early, checked every inch of the house, and then pretended to go to bed at my usual time. Instead, I sat up in the living room with a thermos of coffee, Bolota at my feet, and my shotgun across my lap. I'd called my son earlier that day, but stopped short of telling him what was happening. What could I say? That I was hearing ghosts? That I was losing my mind? He'd want me to move to Sao Paulo to live with him, and I wasn't ready to leave Maria's home. I must have dozed off despite the coffee because I woke with a start to Bolota's whining. The living room was dark. I'd left a lamp on, I was sure of it, but now it was off, and the kitchen light was on. I could see the glow from under the door. I hadn't left the kitchen light on. My hands trembling, I raised the shotgun and moved toward the kitchen. Bolota stayed close to my leg, whimpering softly. I pushed the door open with the barrel of the gun. The kitchen was empty, but the light was definitely on, and the back door was unlocked. I was absolutely certain I'd locked it earlier. I locked it again, checking it twice, and turned to go back to the living room when something caught my eye through the window. A flash of movement by the garden shed. I flicked off the kitchen light and peered out into the darkness. There it was again, a shadow moving between the trees at the edge of my property. Someone was out there. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That someone was turning on my lights and walking around outside? They'd think I was a senile old man. I spent the rest of that night watching out the windows, but saw nothing else. By morning, I was exhausted and jumpy. I called in sick to work and spent the day securing the house, checking windows, changing locks, even boarding up the small basement window that I realized could be a way in. That night, the fourth night, I was ready. I'd installed a new deadbolt on the back door and motion sensor lights outside. I'd moved a cot into the hallway at the bottom of the stairs, positioning myself so I could see both the front door and the staircase. Bolota lay beside me, alert and watchful. The shotgun was loaded and within reach. I must have fallen asleep again because I woke to Bolota's frantic barking. It was pitch black. The power was out. The digital clock on the wall was dead. My phone showed it was just after 3 in the morning, and there were noises coming from upstairs. Not just footsteps this time, but the sound of things being moved around. Drawers opening and closing, things falling to the floor. Someone was ransacking the master bedroom. I grabbed the shotgun and a flashlight, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Bolota was going crazy, barking and circling at the bottom of the stairs. "Stay," I commanded and started up the stairs, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly in front of me. The door to the master bedroom was open, light spilling out into the hallway. But how? The power was out. I raised the shotgun and stepped into the doorway. What I saw froze me to the spot. Maria's clothes, the ones I'd carefully packed away in storage boxes after she died, were scattered all over the floor. Her dresses, her blouses, her shoes, and standing in the middle of the chaos was a woman. Not Maria. This woman was shorter, with darker hair. She was standing with her back to me, holding one of Maria's favorite dresses up to herself, as if checking the size. "Don't move," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She turned slowly. I couldn't make out her face clearly in the strange light, but I could see she was young, maybe 30. She stared at me for a long moment, and then smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. Her mouth stretched too wide, her teeth too white in the darkness. I raised the shotgun higher. "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" She didn't answer. She just kept smiling that terrible smile, her head tilted slightly to one side. And then she took a step toward me. I stumbled backwards, nearly falling. "Stay back," I shouted. She took another step, still smiling, still silent. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space. Plaster rained down between us. When I lowered the gun, she was gone. The dress lay on the floor where she'd been standing, but the woman had vanished. There was nowhere she could have gone. I was blocking the only door, and the windows were still locked from the inside. I heard the front door slam downstairs. Bolota was barking frantically. I ran down the stairs, nearly falling in my haste, and out the front door just in time to see a figure disappearing into the trees at the edge of my property. The police came, took my statement, searched the house and grounds. They found nothing. No fingerprints, no footprints, no sign of forced entry. Just Maria's clothes scattered across our bedroom floor and a hole in the ceiling from my shotgun. They suggested I stay with a friend or one of my children, but this is my home. I won't be driven out. That was 3 months ago. I've installed security cameras, motion sensors, a full alarm system. I sleep with the shotgun beside my bed and Bolota at my feet. 2 weeks ago I saw her again, just a silhouette watching me through the kitchen window. I fired warning shots, but when I went outside, there was no one there. No footprints in the soft earth around the house. Nothing. I haven't seen her since, but I know she's still out there, watching, waiting. For what? I don't know. I'm grateful for Bolota. Without her, I think I might have convinced myself I was imagining the whole thing, but she senses it too, the wrongness in our home. I don't know how much longer I can live like this, but I won't leave. This is Maria's home, our home, and whatever, whoever this woman is, she has no right to it. So I wait, and I watch, and I wonder when she'll come back. Story 3. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. It happened last summer when I was driving from Albuquerque to Los Angeles for a job interview. I'd been putting off the move for years, but finally got the courage to chase that California dream everyone talks about. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts or aliens or whatever, but what happened on that stretch of Route 66 in the Mojave Desert still keeps me up at night. I left Albuquerque around noon, figuring I'd make it to Barstow by nightfall and finish the drive the next morning. The day was scorching hot. Typical desert summer, hitting around 105 degrees. My old Honda Civic doesn't have the best AC, so I was practically melting, windows down when I could stand the hot air blasting in. Around 7 in the evening, I reached Needles, California. The sun was starting to set, painting the desert in these deep oranges and purples. beautiful, but also eerie somehow. I stopped for gas at this rundown station where this old guy at the counter gave me a weird look when I mentioned heading west on Route 66. "Take the interstate," he said, not even looking up from his magazine. "Faster and safer." I told him I wanted the scenic route, that I'd always wanted to drive the historic highway. He just shrugged, but then added, "Don't stop for hitchhikers, and if your car starts acting funny, don't pull over. Just keep driving till you hit Amboy at least." I laughed it off. Thought he was just being dramatic or trying to scare the out-of-towner. I grabbed some snacks, filled my water bottle, and hit the road again as the last bit of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. That's when things started getting weird. About 20 miles west of Needles, my radio started acting up. At first, it was just static cutting in and out of whatever station I'd found. Then, it started cycling through frequencies on its own. I'd try to tune it back, but it would just jump again. Eventually, I shut it off completely, but I swear I could still hear faint voices coming through the speakers, like whispers just below the threshold of understanding. I figured it was just radio interference from military bases or something. The desert's full of that stuff, right? But then my phone lost signal too, which wasn't that surprising given I was in the middle of nowhere, but my GPS was still working 1 minute and then completely gone the next. The screen just showed me in a blank void. No roads, no markers, nothing. By this point it was fully dark, and when I say dark, I mean dark. No streetlights, no distant town glow, nothing but my headlights cutting through absolute blackness. The stars were incredible though, more than I'd ever seen in my life, stretching from horizon to horizon. About an hour in, I started noticing something odd. There were these faint lights way off in the distance, toward what I think was the Amboy crater. At first, I thought they were just distant headlights, or maybe even stars, but they moved wrong. They would hover, then zip sideways, then stop again. Never getting closer or further away, just watching, it felt like. Then my car started to act up. The engine would surge, then sputter, like it was getting too much gas, then none at all. The headlights dimmed, then brightened randomly. The temperature gauge started climbing even though it was night and getting cooler. I remembered what the gas station guy said about not stopping if my car acted strange, so I kept going, foot steady on the gas. That's when I saw them for the first time. Standing along the side of the road was a line of people, or at least they looked like people at first glance. They were perfectly spaced, maybe 15 feet apart, completely motionless. I slowed down a bit as I approached, thinking maybe they were hitchhikers or their car had broken down, but something felt off. As my headlights swept across them, I realized they weren't moving at all, not shifting weight from foot to foot, not turning to look at my approaching car, nothing. They just stood there perfectly still, facing the road. They were wearing regular clothes, jeans, t-shirts, normal stuff, but they were too clean, too perfect for being out in the desert. And their eyes, God, their eyes. They reflected my headlights like animal eyes do, but pure black. No whites, no irises, just black pools that seemed to swallow the light. I sped up, heart pounding in my chest. As I passed each one, I could swear they turned their heads to follow my car, moving only their necks while their bodies remained perfectly still. I counted 7 of them spaced along about half a mile of road, and then they were gone. I was breathing hard, telling myself it was just my imagination, just road fatigue, just the darkness playing tricks. Maybe they were just some weird art installation or scarecrows. Desert folk can be eccentric, right? But deep down, I knew better. The road stretched on, empty again. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I switched on the radio hoping for some human voices to keep me company, but instead of static or music, I heard children laughing. It was distant at first, then louder, then it turned into something else. Not quite laughter anymore, but not quite screaming either. I jabbed the power button so hard, I hurt my finger. Around what must have been 10 o'clock, I saw lights ahead. Not the strange, distant lights from before, but normal, golden lights that meant civilization. I felt relief wash over me. I was approaching a small cluster of buildings that I later learned was Amboy, basically a ghost town with just a famous old motel called Roy's and not much else. As I got closer, I noticed something in the road ahead, a small figure standing right in the center of my lane. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the worn asphalt. It was a child, a little girl maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a blue dress that looked like something from the 70s. My heart nearly stopped. What was a kid doing out here alone at night? I rolled to a stop about 20 feet away from her and put the car in park, leaving the engine running. Something told me not to get out, not to approach her, but I couldn't just leave a child alone in the desert at night. "Hey!" I called through my open window. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" She didn't respond, didn't move at all. Just stood there, head slightly down so I couldn't see her face clearly in my headlights. "Do you need help?" I tried again. "I can take you to the next town if you're lost." Slowly she raised her head. Her face looked wrong. Too pale, too perfect, like a doll's face. And then she smiled, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across her face. I felt my blood turn to ice. Something deep inside me, some primal instinct, was screaming danger. I reached to put the car back in drive, but the engine died, just cut out completely. I turned the key. Nothing, not even a click. The headlights were still on, but dimming rapidly. The girl took a step toward me, then another. Her movements were jerky, almost like stop-motion animation. I tried the engine again, still nothing. The headlights dimmed further as she approached, now just 10 feet from my bumper. I was about to abandon the car and run when my rearview mirror caught my attention. Behind me, lining both sides of the road, were the figures I'd seen earlier. Dozens of them now, all perfectly still, all facing my car. I was trapped. The girl was at my hood now, her hand reaching out to touch the metal. As her fingers made contact, the headlights went completely dark. I couldn't see anything except the stars above and the faint outline of the girl illuminated by my dashboard lights. Then those went out too. Total darkness. I heard a soft tapping on my driver's side window. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't see who or what was doing it, but I knew it wasn't human, not anymore. In that moment, I've never been more terrified in my life. I was shaking so hard I could barely think. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight, but it was dead too. Everything electronic was dead. The tapping continued, now at every window of my car. Tap, 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 in perfect synchronization. I sank down in my seat, covered my ears, and closed my eyes tight like a kid hiding from monsters. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to stop. All I know is that eventually I felt something change. The air pressure shifted like when a storm is coming. There was a sound like rushing wind, but I couldn't feel any air moving. And then silence. Complete, absolute silence. No tapping, no wind, nothing. I waited, still too scared to open my eyes. After what felt like forever, I heard a click. The dashboard lights flickered on. The engine turned over on its own. I hadn't touched the key. The headlights blazed back to life, brighter than before. The road ahead was empty. No little girl. I checked all my mirrors. No figures standing along the roadside. Just empty desert as far as the light could reach. My GPS sprang back to life, showing me exactly where I was on Route 66, about half a mile from Amboy. My phone chirped with incoming text messages, signal restored. I put the car in drive and floored it. I didn't stop until I reached Barstow, ignoring Roy's motel, ignoring everything but the need to get away from that place. I pulled into the first motel I saw in Barstow and collapsed on the bed, still in my clothes, still shaking. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been exhaustion, hallucinations, or maybe even some kind of gas leak in my car. The desert can play tricks on your mind, right? Heat, isolation, fatigue. It's the perfect recipe for seeing things. But when I checked my phone, I found something that still chills me to the bone. While the phone had been dead, the camera had activated. There were 16 photos in my gallery that I didn't take. Most were just black frames, but 3 showed something. One captured a blurry figure standing by my car door. Another showed what looked like multiple silhouettes lined up along the road. The last one, the one that still makes me sick to look at, clearly showed a child's handprint on my driver's side window, but the fingers were too long, the palm too narrow to be human. I deleted them immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I wish I'd saved them as proof, but in that moment, I just wanted them gone. I took the interstate the rest of the way to LA. Got the job, found an apartment, tried to forget. But I can't stop thinking about what happened on that road. About the Mitchell family who vanished there in '73. About all the others who disappeared along that same stretch. Sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if my car hadn't started again? Would I have become another statistic, another mystery of the ghost highway, another abandoned vehicle with no explanation? I don't know what's out there in the Mojave, along that forgotten stretch of Route 66, but whatever it is, it's watching, waiting. And sometimes, for reasons I can't understand, it lets people go to tell the tale. Story 4. I still get shaky typing this out, even though it's been a few months now. I'm not really the type to share personal stuff online, but I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. We moved to Oakwood Hills about 3 years ago. It seemed perfect. Good schools, quiet streets, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave to each other. My wife Amy and I bought our first home here, a modest 3-bedroom with a decent backyard for our son Thomas to play in. He was just turning 2 at the time of the incident, that perfect age where they're into absolutely everything and you can't take your eyes off them for a second. That Saturday morning started like any other. Amy had left early for her yoga class, and I was making pancakes while Thomas was playing with his trucks on the kitchen floor. I remember the pancakes were dinosaur-shaped, those silly molds you buy thinking your kid will be impressed, but they never really look right. I turned away for maybe 20 seconds to flip one, and when I looked back, Thomas was gone. This had become his new thing lately. The second you weren't looking, he'd make a break for it. Usually he'd just run to the living room or try to climb the stairs, but this time I heard the distinctive squeak of our back screen door. My heart immediately jumped into my throat. I dropped the spatula right there on the counter and rushed after him. Our backyard isn't fenced all the way around. There's that gap by the garden shed that leads straight to the alley behind our house. I'd been meaning to fix it for weeks. "Thomas," I called out, trying not to sound panicked and scare him. I pushed through the screen door and spotted him immediately, his little blue t-shirt and blonde curls bobbing as he toddled toward the alley, laughing like it was the greatest game ever. That's when I heard it, 2 sharp cracks that echoed between the houses. At first, my brain didn't process them as gunshots, maybe a car backfiring or someone dropping something heavy. But then a man appeared at the end of the alley, maybe 30 yards away, and everything slowed down. He was holding something small and silver that caught the morning sunlight. A revolver. He was looking down at it, then tucked it partially into his pocket as he walked briskly in our direction. I can still picture him perfectly. Black leather jacket, even though it was warm that morning. Green hoodie underneath with the hood pulled up. Jeans, white sneakers. He looked young, maybe early 20s, but there was something about the way he moved. This cold confidence that made my skin crawl. His face was partially hidden by the hood, but I could see enough to identify him. Thomas was still running toward the alley, completely unaware. I sprinted forward, not caring if the man saw me. All I could think was, get to Thomas. I scooped him up mid-stride and ducked behind our old chicken coop that we use for storage now. I pressed Thomas against my chest, one hand cupped over his mouth to keep him quiet, and held my breath. The footsteps kept coming closer. I expected, hoped, he'd continue straight down the alley and disappear. Instead, I heard the scrape of shoes on wood as he jumped our neighbor's fence. He was now in the yard directly adjacent to ours, maybe 15 feet away from where we were hiding. I could hear him breathing. That's how close he was. heavy breaths, like he'd been running before the shots. My own heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Thomas squirmed against me, uncomfortable with how tightly I was holding him. And then it happened. Thomas let out a small cry, not loud, just a little whimper of protest at being restrained. But in that silent morning air, it might as well have been a scream. The footsteps stopped. I heard the distinct sound of metal sliding against fabric, his hand going back to the gun. I didn't dare peek around the coupe, but I could sense him turning, scanning the area, looking for the source of the noise. In that moment, I had the most terrifying realization. If he found us, I'd have to fight him. There was no running away with a toddler in my arms, and he'd seen my face clearly enough to know I'd witnessed whatever had just happened down the alley. My mind raced through impossible scenarios. Could I charge him before he raised the gun? Could I throw something to distract him? Would my body be enough to shield Thomas if he fired? Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Thomas, somehow sensing the danger, went completely still in my arms. I could feel his little heart racing against mine. Then, mercifully, the footsteps resumed. He was moving away toward the front of our neighbor's yard. I heard the metallic click of their gate opening and closing. I waited, counting to 30 in my head before I dared to move. When I finally peeked around the coupe, the alley and neighboring yard were empty. I clutched Thomas to my chest and ran back to our house as fast as my legs would carry me, nearly tripping over a garden hose. Once inside, I locked the back door, then ran to the front door and locked that too. I pulled all the blinds down, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the cords. I put Thomas in his playpen and grabbed my phone. My fingers were trembling so hard I misdialed 911 the first time. When the dispatcher answered, I was talking so fast she had to ask me to slow down and repeat myself. "There was a shooting in the alley behind my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A man with a gun. He's on foot, heading east on Maple Street. Please hurry." She asked if anyone was hurt, and I realized I didn't know. Those shots had hit something, or someone. But I hadn't seen a victim, just the shooter. I told her as much. "Officers are on their way," she assured me. "Stay inside with your doors locked. Is your son okay?" Thomas was sitting in his playpen, oblivious to what had just happened, banging two plastic dinosaurs together. "He's fine," I said. "He doesn't understand." After I hung up, I called Amy. Her phone went straight to voicemail. She always turned it off during yoga. I left a message trying to sound calm, asking her to call me as soon as class ended. The police arrived. About 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing but no sirens. I watched through the blinds as they approached our house. Even though I knew they were the good guys, my heart rate spiked when they knocked on the door. I checked through the peephole before opening it. 2 officers stood on our porch, hands resting casually on their belts. The older one introduced himself as Officer Ramirez. His partner was younger, maybe around the same age as the shooter, but with a completely different energy, nervous, eyes constantly scanning. They asked me to go through what happened. I described the man in detail, the direction he went, the gun I saw. Officer Ramirez asked if I could tell what kind of revolver it was. I couldn't. I only knew guns from movies. Small, silver, deadly, that's all I could say. "Did you hear any commotion before the shots? Arguments, shouting?" he asked. I shook my head. It was quiet, just a normal Saturday morning. While we were talking, Mrs. Hernandez from across the street came over. She'd seen the police cars and wanted to know what was happening. When Officer Ramirez explained, her eyes widened. "I saw him," she said. "A young man in a dark jacket. He walked right past my house very fast. I was watering my petunias out front." The officers took her statement too. It matched mine, the description, the timing, the direction. They seemed to take the whole thing more seriously after that. They went to check the alley while I stayed inside with Thomas. About 20 minutes later, Officer Ramirez came back. His expression was grim. "We found shell casings in the alley," he said, "and there's blood on the fence at the north end. Not a lot, but enough to indicate someone was hit. We're canvassing the area for victims or witnesses. He gave me his card and told me to call if I remembered anything else. Then he added, "You did the right thing, staying hidden. Guy like that already fired his weapon, no telling what he might have done if he'd spotted you." After they left, I sat on the couch with Thomas on my lap, holding him tighter than necessary. He squirmed and fussed, wanting to get down and play, not understanding why Daddy was acting so strange. Amy came home around noon, bursting through the door in a panic after hearing my message. I told her everything while Thomas napped, exhausted from the morning's excitement. "We should move," were her first words after I finished. "I don't feel safe here anymore." I couldn't disagree, but I also couldn't help thinking about our mortgage, the money we'd put into renovations, the neighbors we'd come to love. Was one incident enough reason to uproot our lives? That night we learned the answer might be yes. The local news reported that a 19-year-old girl had been killed in a shooting at Oakwood Park, less than a mile from our house. They didn't release details about the suspect, but I knew in my gut it was connected to what I'd seen. I called Officer Ramirez the next day and told him about the news report. He took my information again, but wouldn't confirm if the incidents were related. His voice was professional, detached, but there was an edge to it that told me they were taking this seriously. It's been 3 months now. They never caught the guy, at least not that they've told me. Every time I see a green hoodie or hear a car backfire, my heart races. I've installed security cameras, a better fence, motion detector lights. Thomas isn't allowed in the backyard without one of us right beside him. Amy and I still debate moving. The housing market's tough right now, and honestly, who's to say the next neighborhood would be any safer? At least here, I know what to look out for. What haunts me most isn't just the close call. It's knowing that if Thomas hadn't run out that door at exactly that moment, I would never have seen the shooter. I wouldn't have known danger was literally in our backyard. How many other threats are out there that we narrowly miss seeing? How many times have we been feet away from disaster without ever knowing it? Sometimes at night, I still hear those 2 sharp cracks echoing in my dreams. I see the sunlight glinting off that silver revolver, and I feel Thomas's little heart beating against mine as we hid, perfectly still, while death walked past us. Story 5. I've never told many people about what happened during that trip to Maine. It's been almost 7 years now, but I still get this cold feeling in my stomach whenever I think about it. I guess writing it down might help me process it, even though I doubt I'll ever really understand what was going on those few days. This happened back when I was 15. My best friend Jake had invited me to join his family for a 4-day trip to this rustic resort in northern Maine. It was just Jake, his mom Patricia, his younger sister Emma, who was 13, and me. Jake's dad couldn't make it because of work. The place was called Pineview Lodge, or something generic like that, one of those old-school family resorts that probably hadn't been updated since the 70s. We arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-June. The weather was absolute garbage the entire time we were there. Constant drizzling rain with occasional downpours, and this heavy fog that seemed to cling to everything. The main building was this big wooden lodge with a small restaurant inside, and then there were maybe 15 or 20 cabins scattered around the property, plus some spaces for people with trailers. Our cabin was small but comfortable enough, 2 bedrooms with bunk beds, a tiny bathroom, and a kitchenette. The first afternoon we just got settled in and ate dinner at the lodge restaurant. There were only a few other guests there, an elderly couple and what looked like a family with small kids. The place felt deserted, which Jake's mom said was probably because of the terrible weather forecast for the week. The next morning after breakfast, Jake and I decided to explore the property, despite the drizzling rain. Emma tagged along, even though Jake tried to ditch her at first. We had our rain jackets on, but we still got pretty wet walking around. Behind the main lodge, there was this clearing with a few picnic tables that looked like they hadn't been used in ages. The wooden tables were warped and splintering, with moss growing on them. About 15 meters past those tables, the trees started again, but we noticed a break in the tree line and what looked like an old rusty wire fence. We decided to check it out, pushing through some wet bushes to get there. That's when we found the ponds. There were two of them, not very big, maybe 8 meters across each. They were surrounded by this rusty wire fence that came up to about my chest height. The ponds themselves looked really stagnant and murky, with a bunch of fallen leaves floating on top and algae growing around the edges. The whole area had this abandoned feeling like nobody had maintained it for years. "What do you think these were for?" Emma asked. Jake guessed they might have been for fishing or maybe swimming back when the resort was newer. We were just walking around the perimeter of the fence when we heard it. The sound of twigs snapping and leaves rustling, like someone walking through the bushes on the far side of the second pond. At first, I thought it was probably just an animal, a deer or something, but the footsteps sounded heavy, deliberate. "Hello?" Jake called out. No response. I can't really explain the feeling that came over me in that moment. It was like this instant, overwhelming sense of dread, like every cell in my body was screaming that something was wrong. I glanced at Jake and could tell he felt it too. His face had gone pale. "Let's go back," he said quickly. None of us argued. We hurried back through the wet brush toward the main grounds of the resort. When we got back to the cabin, none of us mentioned the weird feeling we'd had. It seemed stupid in the safety of our cabin, just kids freaking themselves out in the woods. Patricia made us hot chocolate, and we spent the rest of the day playing board games and watching the ancient TV that only got 3 channels. The next day, Thursday, the rain had let up a bit, so after lunch we decided to go back out. This time we avoided the pond area and instead went exploring in the woods on the opposite side of our cabin. There was a faint trail there that wound between the trees. The ground was soggy and we were stomping around, breaking sticks and being loud like kids do. That's when I first noticed it. We'd stopped to look at something, and from somewhere deeper in the forest, maybe 60 meters away, we'd hear the same sounds we were making, like someone breaking branches, exactly the way we had been. At first, I thought it was just an echo, but the timing was off. It happened after we'd been quiet for a few seconds. "Do you guys hear that?" I whispered to Jake and Emma. Jake nodded slowly. "Is somebody out there?" he called. His voice sounded tense. Again, no response, just silence. "Maybe it's another guest?" Emma suggested, but her voice wavered. I remember looking around, trying to orient myself. "There aren't any cabins in that direction," I said. "It's just forest all the way to the property boundary." We stood frozen for a minute, listening. Nothing. Then Jake grabbed my sleeve. "Come on, let's head back." We made our way back to the cabin much faster than we'd ventured out. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I never saw anything in the trees behind us. That afternoon it started pouring again, so we stayed inside until dinner. Patricia had noticed we seemed on edge, but we just told her we were bored from being cooped up because of the rain. After dinner at the lodge, the rain had died down to a drizzle again, and for some reason, Jake suggested we go check out the ponds one more time. I think he was trying to prove to himself and us that there was nothing to be afraid of. Emma didn't want to go, but she also didn't want to be left alone in the cabin, so all 3 of us headed back to that rusty fence and the murky ponds. The setting sun was completely hidden behind clouds, and it was getting dark earlier because of the weather. The whole area seemed even more eerie than before. We'd just reached the fence when we heard it again, footsteps. But this time, they weren't cautious. They were fast, like someone running through the underbrush on the far side of the ponds. The sound circled around, moving from one side to the other. Shit. Jake grabbed Emma's arm, and we all turned and ran. We didn't stop until we reached the lodge, panting and wild-eyed. A few of the resort staff gave us strange looks, but nobody asked what was wrong. Back at the cabin, Patricia was concerned when she saw how shaken we were. We told her we'd just been playing chase and got carried away. I don't think she believed us, but she didn't push it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the footsteps, how they'd moved so quickly around the pond and the way they seemed to be circling us. Around 2 in the morning, I heard Jake climb down from the top bunk. "You awake?" he whispered. Yeah, I replied. I want to go back to that clearing where we heard the branch breaking. I need to know what's going on. I thought he was insane, but I also knew I wouldn't let him go alone. We woke up Emma, who immediately called us idiots but also refused to stay behind. We put on our shoes and jackets and snuck out of the cabin, using the flashlights on our phones to guide us. The resort was completely silent and dark except for a few security lights around the main lodge. The rain had finally stopped, but there was still this heavy mist hanging in the air. We made our way to the clearing where we'd heard the mimicking sounds earlier. What exactly are we doing here? Emma whispered, clutching her brother's sleeve. I just want to see if it happens again, Jake said. He picked up a stick and deliberately snapped it. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. We waited, holding our breath. Nothing. Jake broke another stick. Still nothing. This is stupid, Emma said. Can we go back now? That's when I saw it. Just a brief movement at first, at the edge of my phone's flashlight beam. I swung the light back, and for a split second, I caught sight of what looked like a person standing behind a tree about 20 meters away, just a glimpse of a dark shape partially hidden. As soon as my light hit that spot, the figure moved quickly, ducking completely behind the tree. There's someone there, I hissed, pointing with my light. Jake and Emma both looked where I was pointing, but the figure was now completely hidden behind the trunk. Hello? Jake called, his voice cracking. We can see you. Nothing moved, no response. Let's get out of here, Emma pleaded. We backed away slowly, keeping our lights trained on that tree. Once we felt we were far enough away, we turned and ran full speed back to the cabin. We locked the door behind us and huddled together in the living room until morning. The next day was Friday, our last day at the resort. None of us mentioned what had happened to Patricia, but we stayed within sight of the cabin all day. We were scheduled to leave after lunch, and I've never been so relieved to pack up a car in my life. As we were loading our bags, I found myself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see someone watching us. The forest edge remained still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on us. On the drive home, we finally talked about it among ourselves. Comparing notes, we realized that whatever or whoever had been out there had been following us throughout our stay. They were by the pond when we first explored it. They were in the forest when we were breaking branches, and they were watching us that night when we went back to the clearing. The thing that disturbs me most, even now, is the intentionality of it all. Someone was out there in the rain and fog, keeping track of our movements, hiding just out of sight and occasionally letting us know they were there. Why? What did they want? I've looked up the resort online a few times since then, wondering if there were any stories about strange occurrences there, but I've never found anything. Jake and I have talked about it over the years, and neither of us has come up with a reasonable explanation. Was it some weird local who liked scaring tourists? A resort employee with a sick sense of humor? Or something else entirely? All I know for sure is that I'll never go back to that place, and I still get nervous when I hear twigs breaking in the woods behind me. Story 6. I've been in specialized logistics for over 13 years now. Night runs, irregular schedules, sensitive cargo, that's my bread and butter. I've delivered everything from medical equipment to electronics across 6 states, and I've always prided myself on being alert and careful. Until last Tuesday, I thought I'd seen it all. It was around 2 in the morning when I pulled up to the distribution center on the outskirts of Portela City. One of those massive industrial parks where everything looks the same. Concrete buildings, chain link fences, and those bright white security lights that make everything look washed out. I was running a bit late, maybe 15 minutes behind schedule, which isn't like me at all, but there had been an accident on the highway that slowed everyone down, so I wasn't too worried about it. Night deliveries at places like this usually operate with skeleton crews, just a handful of people keeping things running until the morning shift takes over, so I wasn't surprised when I didn't see a guard at the entrance booth. Happens all the time, especially at places where the regular staff knows most of the drivers. As I slowed down near the gate, I spotted a guy in a reflective safety vest waving me down with a flashlight. Looked completely normal. The vest had those yellow and silver stripes. He was holding a clipboard, and I could even see an earpiece with a wire running down into his collar. Nothing out of the ordinary. He flagged me to stop and approached my window. "You're the partial load for Bay 3, right?" he asked, checking something on his clipboard. I nodded and handed him my manifest. He glanced at it, then pointed toward the loading area. "Make a left at the first intersection and park in spot 17. It's past the main docks." Then he actually smiled and said, "Hope you brought donuts. Night shift's dragging." It was such a normal interaction, the kind I've had thousands of times before. So I followed his directions, made the turn, and backed into spot 17 like he said. The area was well lit, but oddly quiet. Usually, there's at least some activity. A forklift moving around, someone shouting instructions, the beeping of vehicles backing up. But there was nothing. I was gathering my paperwork when I noticed the same guy had followed me on foot. He was maybe 30 feet away, walking casually toward my truck. When he saw me looking, he pointed to a door at the far side of the warehouse. "Just leave your paperwork in the box inside that office. They'll process it when they finish their break." Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Everything looked right. The guy knew the lingo, wore the right gear, gave specific directions. But that silence was getting to me. I climbed down from my cab, clutching my clipboard, and started walking toward the office door he'd pointed out. That's when I heard it. A small metallic click behind me near my trailer. I turned around and saw another man, different from the first one, standing by my trailer doors. He had the hood of his sweatshirt up despite the warm night, sleeves rolled up showing tattoos on his forearms, and he was opening my trailer lock with what looked like a key. My heart jumped into my throat. I started running back toward my truck, my steel-toed boots echoing loudly on the concrete. But before I made it halfway, a third man appeared from between two shipping containers. He just stood there with his arms raised slightly, like he was just passing through, but his position blocked my direct path back to the cab. In that moment, everything clicked. This wasn't a legitimate operation. The security guard had flagged me down while his partners were already in position. They were working my trailer like they owned it. Smooth, practiced movements like they'd done this dozens of times before. And they probably had. I changed direction, circling wide around the third man, and sprinted back to my cab. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with my keys, but I managed to get inside and lock the doors. I started the engine and immediately began leaning on the horn. Long, continuous blasts that shattered the silence of the yard. The reaction was immediate. The yard erupted in panic, but not the kind you'd expect from startled workers. This was organized chaos. The guy inside my trailer jumped out, leaving the doors hanging open. The one who had been blocking my path disappeared behind some pallets, and the fake security guard, he just started running, hands up in the air like he was surrendering, but he was just getting the hell out of there. I grabbed my phone and called dispatch, my voice coming out in a panicked rush. They told me to stay put and that they were calling emergency services. I kept watching through my mirrors, but the men were gone, vanished into the shadows of the industrial park as quickly as they had appeared. The police took 20 minutes to arrive, 20 minutes of sitting alone in my cab, doors locked, engine running, wondering if the men would come back. By the time the patrol cars pulled in with their lights flashing, the yard was completely silent again. The officers took my statement, then checked my trailer. 4 pallets were missing, including 2 from a contracted medical shipment. Expensive stuff, but not narcotics, the kind of merchandise that's hard to trace once it's removed from its packaging. They found the lock had been picked with professional tools, not broken or forced open. The police asked about security cameras, and I pointed out the ones I could see mounted on the building corners. But something told me these guys knew exactly where the blind spots were. They moved with too much confidence not to have mapped the place out thoroughly. The worst part wasn't the theft itself. It was how normal they made everything seem, until suddenly it wasn't. That first guy, the fake security guard, he knew exactly what to say, how to act. He knew the terminology, wore the right gear, even made small talk about donuts. If I hadn't happened to turn around at exactly the right moment, they would have emptied half my trailer before I realized anything was wrong. The next day, I found out this wasn't the first time something like this had happened in the area. The detective I spoke with said there had been at least 3 similar incidents in the past 6 months, always at night, always with someone posing as security or staff, always targeting specific shipments. They think it's the same crew hitting different facilities. The footage from the security cameras was forwarded to the site managers and regional freight security, but everyone knew how it would go. The men kept their faces angled away from cameras, wore generic clothes with no identifying features, and of course, there were no license plates or vehicle information to track. That night changed how I approach every delivery now. I don't just rely on text messages for delivery instructions anymore. I call ahead and verify names. I circle each yard twice before I stop, checking for security cameras, looking for emergency exits, noticing who's around and what they're doing. I watch for patterns of movement, signs that something's off. Sometimes I think about how easily it could have gone differently. What if I had confronted them directly? What if they had been armed? What if I hadn't noticed until they were already gone with half my cargo? The most frightening part isn't that they stole from me. It's how calculated it was, how they made everything look so legitimate. The right clothes, the right words, the right positioning. They created a perfect illusion of normalcy until the moment they didn't need it anymore. It's been almost a week now, and I still catch myself looking over my shoulder every time I make a night delivery. I check my mirrors more often. I'm more hesitant to leave my cab. That confidence I had from 13 years on the job, it's shaken, because now I know that sometimes things can look exactly right until suddenly they're very, very wrong. And in my line of work, by the time you notice the difference, it might already be too late. Story 7. I've been working the night shift at Hillcrest Cemetery for 17 years now. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., all alone among the headstones and mausoleums. People always ask me how I can stand it, working nights in a creepy cemetery. Truth is, I've always preferred it. Less physical labor than day shifts, better pay, and it's usually peaceful. Plus, after so many years, you get used to the quiet and the shadows. Until last month, I would have told you nothing truly frightening had ever happened during my time here. Sure, I've dealt with my share of disturbances, drunk teenagers thinking they're brave, the occasional grave robber. The pounding suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the noise had been. Was he giving up? Had he found another way in? Was he waiting for me to check if he was gone? The dispatcher advised me to stay where I was and not approach the door. About 5 minutes later, I heard sirens approaching. I stayed on the phone until the officers called out, identifying themselves outside the door. When I finally opened the door, there were 2 police officers standing there, flashlights and hands on their weapons. They asked if I was all right, then immediately began searching the grounds while a 3rd officer stayed with me. They found no one, no sign of forced entry anywhere else, no vehicles parked nearby that shouldn't have been there, nothing. When they returned, they took my statement. I described the man as best I could, probably in his 30s or 40s, white, dark hair, average height and build, wearing dark clothes. Nothing distinctive except for that look of pure hatred. The officers were professional, but I could tell they were skeptical. Just another cemetery worker spooked by shadows, probably. Then one of them asked about security cameras. I showed them our system, which records footage for 2 weeks before overwriting. We pulled up the external camera that partially covered the administration building entrance. What we saw chilled me to my core. The man had stood outside the door for about 15 minutes before he started pounding. Just standing there, completely motionless, staring at the door. Then he began his assault on it, not just with his fists, but with his legs, his shoulders, even his head. The way he moved was all wrong, jerky and unnatural, throwing his entire body against the door with a force that should have injured him. But he showed no signs of pain or fatigue, just that same blank, hateful expression I'd seen earlier. The officers' attitudes changed immediately. They called for additional units and conducted a more thorough search of the grounds. They took a copy of the footage and filed a formal report. One of them told me I was lucky I hadn't confronted him directly at the door. They never found him, never identified him. The case is still open, but I don't expect they'll ever solve it. The officers suggested it might have been someone under the influence of drugs like PCP or bath salts, which can cause both extreme aggression and insensitivity to pain. But that doesn't explain the look he gave me, or why he targeted me specifically. After that night, my supervisor authorized me to carry a weapon during my shifts. I'm grateful for that, but I'm not sure it would help if he came back. I still work the night shift. I need this job and the pay it provides. But I don't patrol alone anymore. We've hired an additional night security person and we work in pairs now. Sometimes when I'm working, I'll get that feeling again, the sensation of being watched. I'll turn around, half expecting to see him standing there with that look of hatred. So far, he hasn't returned. But every night when I arrive for my shift, I wonder if this will be the night he comes back. I still don't understand what happened or why. Was it random, or was I specifically targeted? What would have happened if he had gotten through that door? These questions keep me up during the day when I should be sleeping. All I know is that for 17 years, I thought the dead were the only permanent residents of Hillcrest Cemetery. Now I'm not so sure what or who might be wandering among the graves when darkness falls. Story 8. I still can't shake what happened to me at that resort 13 years ago. I was just 13, still playing with hair clips and reading teen magazines, when my parents took me to this supposedly dream vacation at Palm Harbor. You know those all-inclusive places where everything seems perfect? Well, it wasn't. Not for me. It started on our third day there. I was hanging by the pool while my parents were getting drinks at the bar. Nothing unusual, just reading my book with my feet dangling in the water. That's when I first noticed him watching me. He wasn't even trying to hide it, just sitting there across the pool area, staring. He looked about 20, maybe a bit older. Dark hair, average build, nothing particularly memorable about him except for his eyes. They were intense, like he was studying me. At first, I thought maybe I was being paranoid or something. You know how 13-year-olds can be, thinking everyone's looking at them when they're not. But no, this was different. When our eyes met, he didn't look away embarrassed like most people would. He just kept staring with this weird half smile. Being 13 and naive, I thought maybe he was just shy or something. So when I went to get a soda from the pool bar later and he happened to be there, I tried to be friendly. Just a simple hi with a polite smile. That was my first mistake. His response was off. He didn't really say anything, just nodded slightly and kept looking at me with those eyes. I felt this immediate chill, like someone had just walked over my grave. Something in my gut was screaming, "Get away from this person." I mumbled something about needing to get back to my parents and practically ran away. The next morning we went to the beach. Guess who was there, about 30 feet down the shore? Him. Just sitting on a beach chair, facing our direction. Not swimming, not reading, not on his phone, just watching. Later that day, we went to the resort restaurant for lunch. He was at a corner table, alone. When we went to the evening entertainment show, he was in the back row. When we walked through the lobby to go back to our room, he was suddenly in the gift shop. I started pointing him out to my parents, but they weren't as concerned as I was. "Honey, it's a resort. People tend to be at the same places," my mom said. Dad was a bit more attentive, but still thought I was exaggerating. "He's probably just lonely, traveling by himself," he suggested. But it wasn't just that he was in the same places. It was how he was there, always watching me, never interacting with anyone else, never doing anything that people normally do on vacation. I never once saw him swimming, eating properly, talking to staff, nothing. Just observing. always with that same unsettling half smile. I started getting truly scared by the fourth day. I began noticing little things that made it all worse, like how sometimes I'd see him wearing different clothes within the same hour, as if he'd rushed to change just to follow us to a new location, or how he seemed to know our schedule before we did, like when we decided on a whim to try the Italian restaurant instead of the buffet, and somehow he was already there when we arrived. My parents, being protective in general, never let me wander the resort alone, which was the only thing keeping me sane. I was always with one or both of them, but even so, I started having trouble sleeping. I'd wake up at night convinced he was somehow outside our door, just waiting. On the fifth night, the resort had this big Caribbean-themed show with dancers and fire performers. My parents were enjoying it, but after about an hour, I was bored and tired. Our room was just a short elevator ride up from the main entertainment area, and I begged my parents to let me go back to the room alone. "It's just up the elevator, Dad," I pleaded. "I'll go straight there and lock the door. I'm 13, not 5. After some back and forth, they agreed. Mom gave me the key card, and Dad said he'd be up in an hour when the show ended. I got up and started walking toward the lobby. I had that sensation, that feeling of being watched. I glanced back toward the performance area, and there he was, standing up from his seat, eyes locked on me. My heart dropped to my stomach. I walked faster, hoping maybe I was just being paranoid again. The lobby was pretty, empty, just a couple at the front desk checking in, and a staff member arranging flowers. I hit the elevator button repeatedly, praying it would come quickly. When it arrived, I stepped in and hit the button for the 7th floor. Just as the doors were starting to close, a hand slipped between them. It was him. The doors reopened and he stepped inside, just him and me, alone. He didn't select a floor, he just stood there, watching me with that same half smile that now seemed absolutely sinister. I pressed myself against the back wall of the elevator, clutching my key card so hard my knuckles turned white. The silence was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. He didn't say anything, didn't move toward me, but somehow that made it worse. There was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating, like he was deciding what to do with me. The doors began to close again, and I genuinely believed in that moment that I was in serious danger, that this man had been stalking me for days and now had me alone. My throat closed up with fear. I couldn't even scream. And then, I'll never forget this moment for as long as I live, just before the doors fully closed, a boot wedged between them. The doors slid back open, and there stood my dad. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I nearly collapsed. My dad stepped into the elevator casually, like nothing was wrong, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the alertness in his posture. "Evening," he said to the man, making direct eye contact with him. Not aggressive, not confrontational, but with this unmistakable undercurrent of, "I see you." The man's demeanor changed instantly. The smile disappeared. He seemed to shrink somehow, backing into the corner opposite from us. When we reached the 7th floor, my dad put his arm around my shoulders and guided me out. The man stayed in the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of his face. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked frustrated, angry even. Back in our room, I broke down crying, finally telling my dad everything about how the man had been following me, watching me for days. Dad listened intently, his face growing more concerned. "I saw him get up right after you left," he explained. "Something just didn't feel right. Call it father's intuition." My mom came back shortly after, and they decided we would check out the next morning, cutting our vacation short by 2 days. That night, they let me sleep in the bed between them, like I used to do when I was little and had nightmares. The next morning, as we were packing, my dad went to the front desk to sort out our early departure. When he came back, his expression was strange. "The staff has no record of a guest matching that description," he told us. "They checked their system. No single male in his 20s checked in during the past week. Could he be staying with someone else? Or be someone's adult son?" my mom suggested. Dad shook his head. I described him to several staff members. No one recognizes him. No one has seen him at all. We left the resort within the hour. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire way to the airport, terrified I'd see him following us. But he never appeared again. 13 years have passed, and I still think about it. I've traveled many times since then, stayed at dozens of hotels and resorts, but I've never felt comfortable alone in elevators. I always wait for others to join before getting in. Sometimes I try to rationalize what happened. Maybe he was just socially awkward. Maybe he had some developmental issues that made his behavior seem creepier than intended. Maybe he wasn't even focused on me specifically, and I was just a self-centered teenager. But deep down, I know that's not true. The intensity of his focus, the way he seemed to materialize wherever I went, the fact that no staff member knew who he was, it all points to something far more sinister. I've read enough true crime to understand that predators often stalk their victims, learning their patterns before making a move. I think about what might have happened in that elevator if my dad hadn't shown up exactly when he did, and it makes me sick to my stomach. I don't know who that man was or what his intentions were. Maybe he was just a creep who got off on making young girls uncomfortable. Or maybe he was something much worse, someone who had targeted me for something truly horrific. What I do know is that my dad's split-second decision to follow me potentially saved me from becoming another tragic statistic, another paradise vacation turned nightmare. I've never told him this, but I check my surroundings constantly because of what happened. I notice people who appear in too many places. I trust my gut when it tells me something is off about someone. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, watching other young girls at resorts. If he's found victims who didn't have a father show up at the last second. That thought keeps me up at night more than I'd like to admit. I've never been able to explain who he was or why he fixated on me. All I know is that moment in the elevator was the most terrified I've ever been in my life, and I'm grateful every day that I'll never know what might have happened next. Story 9. I can't believe I'm finally putting this all down. I've been trying to make sense of what happened for months now. Every time I try to tell someone, they either think I'm crazy or they give me that pitying look like I'm some trauma victim who can't handle reality. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to Millfield because I was there until the very end. I grew up in that little township in western Pennsylvania, just a small place with about 600 people where everyone knew each other's business. My family had been there for generations. My dad worked at the lumber mill outside town. My mom taught third grade at the elementary school. Normal life, boring even. Everything changed after that damn cell tower went up. It had been a whole thing in town for years. The younger folks, myself included I'll admit, kept pushing for better phone service. We were sick of having to stand on specific spots on our porches just to get a single bar of reception. The older folks fought it, saying it would ruin the character of the town, or some nonsense. Typical small-town politics. The council finally caved in the fall of 1990. Construction started in October on the edge of town, where Old Miller Road meets the forest. I remember driving past it every day on my way to work at the pharmacy. Just a tall metal structure, nothing special, nothing that looked like it could destroy an entire community. They switched it on November 1st. I remember because it was the day after Halloween, and everyone was joking that the tower was our town's new monster. We had no idea how right we were. The first weird thing I noticed was the dogs, or rather, the lack of dogs barking. Millfield always had this background noise of dogs, Mrs. Peterson's beagles, the Wilson's German Shepherd, that annoying little terrier at the end of my street. But within a week of the tower going up, they all went quiet, like completely silent. Then came the fog. Pennsylvania gets foggy, sure, but not like this. This fog was different, thicker somehow, and it didn't move right. It would hang around certain houses, sometimes for days, while leaving others completely clear. And it had this faint glow to it when moonlight hit it just right. I first heard the humming about 2 weeks after the tower was activated. I was trying to sleep when I noticed it. this low, steady electrical hum that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I thought it was just my refrigerator or something, but when I unplugged everything in my house, it was still there. That's when I went to see Thomas Reeves. He lived 3 streets over on Maple, a retired electrical engineer who everyone in town went to when they had wiring problems. I figured if anyone would know about strange electrical noises, it would be him. Thomas was already on it. When I showed up at his door, his living room looked like some mad scientist's lab. He had all these meters and devices set up, notebooks filled with readings and times. "You hear it too?" he asked, before I could even explain why I was there. When I nodded, he just sighed and invited me in. He showed me his readings, electromagnetic levels that made no sense for our little town, and they spiked whenever that strange fog appeared. Thomas had been tracking it for days, mapping which houses the fog lingered around. He had this theory that the tower wasn't just a cell tower, that it was doing something else entirely. "The frequencies are all wrong," he told me, showing me charts I didn't understand. "Cell towers operate on specific bandwidths. This one's putting out signals I've never seen before." I didn't take him too seriously at first. Thomas had always been a bit eccentric, but then people started getting nosebleeds. Random, sudden nosebleeds that wouldn't stop for hours. My mom had one that soaked through 3 towels, and everyone who got them reported the same thing. The humming was louder for them, almost painful. Sheriff Donovan brushed it all off, said it was just dry winter air causing the nosebleeds, and the humming was probably some new equipment at the lumber mill. But I knew he was hearing it too. I saw him popping painkillers like candy at the pharmacy where I worked. "Headaches," he said. Terrible headaches that started when the tower went up. Then came the phone calls. Mine was on December 10th, an unknown number. When I answered, there was just static at first, then something else. It's hard to describe. It wasn't words exactly, more like sounds that almost formed words. Low, gurgling noises mixed with high-pitched tones that made my teeth hurt. I listened for maybe 30 seconds before hanging up, my heart racing. The next day at work, at least a dozen people came in for sleeping pills. No one could sleep through the humming anymore, and everyone was getting those calls. Thomas Reeves disappeared on December 17th. I remember the exact date because I was supposed to go over that evening to see his latest readings. When he didn't answer his door, I peered through the windows. His breakfast was still on the table, coffee half drunk, toast with a single bite taken out of it. On the kitchen floor were these strange black marks, like something had burned the linoleum. I called Sheriff Donovan, but by the time he arrived, I'd already found Thomas's journal. The last entry just said, "They're not just watching anymore, they're coming inside." It made the hair on my arms stand up. The sheriff found the same burn marks in Thomas's workshop. All his equipment was fried, the meters stuck at their highest readings, and Thomas was just gone. No signs of struggle, no note, nothing taken except Thomas himself. That was just the beginning. Over the next 3 weeks, 17 more people vanished. The Petersons from Church Street, old Mr. Gunderson who ran the hardware store, Jenny Wilson, who I'd gone to high school with, and her 2 kids. All gone, all with those same burn marks somewhere in their homes. By January, people were panicking. At least a third of the town had packed up and left. Those of us who stayed formed watch groups, taking shifts to patrol the streets at night. Not that it helped. People disappeared regardless, always when that fog was thickest. Some technicians from the phone company came out to check the tower. They were supposed to shut it down, just to see if that would stop whatever was happening. They came back white-faced, refusing to go near it again. Said the tower wasn't broadcasting any cellular signal they recognized, said the equipment inside wasn't standard, had components they couldn't identify. I got my second call on January 18th. This time, I recorded it. When I played it back, slowed down, I could make out voices. Voices of people I knew, people who had disappeared, all speaking together in this flat, wrong way. And behind their voices was something else, something that didn't sound human at all. On January 21st, the fog came in thicker than ever. It rolled through town at sunset, so dense you couldn't see more than a few feet in front of you. The humming was unbearable that night, like standing next to a transformer. My nose bled for 3 hours straight. I barricaded myself in my bathroom, the only room without windows, and shoved towels under the door to keep the fog out. I must have passed out eventually. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the bathroom window. The fog was gone, and so was the humming. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. I stepped outside to find an empty town. 43 more people gone overnight, including everyone at the sheriff's office. Cars left in driveways, doors standing open, meals uneaten on tables, and those burn marks everywhere, on sidewalks, on floors, on the sides of buildings. By noon, I'd made up my mind. I threw some clothes in a bag, grabbed what cash I had, and headed for my car. As I was leaving town, I drove past the tower one last time. It looked different somehow, almost like it was vibrating slightly, though it was perfectly still. And I swear I could see faces in the metal, just for a second, distorted, screaming faces of people I'd known my whole life. I've been staying with a cousin in Ohio since then. The official investigation said it was something in the water, that it made everyone hallucinate and then flee. They never found a single body, never explained the burn marks or the equipment in the tower that no one recognized. But I know what I heard in those phone calls. I know what Thomas meant in his final journal entry. Whatever came through that tower wasn't just signals. They were using it as a door, a way in. Sometimes I still get calls from unknown numbers. I never answer them. And on foggy nights, when the power lines hum outside my window, I pack a bag and sleep in my car, as far from any electrical sources as I can get. Millfield is still there, empty and quiet. The tower still stands. And sometimes when I can't sleep, I wonder if they're still inside it, all those people who disappeared. I wonder if they're trying to call someone else home. Story 10. I've worked at Ravenwood Funeral Home for almost 11 years now. Most people get weird when I tell them what I do for a living. They either get really quiet or start asking a million questions about dead bodies. I'm used to both reactions by now. The truth is, it's a pretty normal job most of the time, peaceful even. I prepare the deceased, coordinate with families, and make sure everything runs smoothly for viewings and services. It's predictable work, or at least it was until this January. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. Working around the dead desensitizes you pretty quickly. But what happened that week? I still don't have an explanation for it. I'm not even sure I want one. It was a Wednesday night, absolutely freezing outside with that biting January cold that gets into your bones. I was working late, which wasn't unusual. Our funeral home is small, just 2 viewing rooms, a modest office space, and the preparation room in the back where I do most of my work. My boss, Dave, had left hours earlier, leaving me to finish preparing Mr. Calloway for his viewing the next morning. I was almost finished, just doing some final touch-ups on Mr. Calloway's makeup when I got this weird feeling. You know that sensation when you realize someone's watching you? It was like that, but stronger. I glanced up toward the doorway and nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a man standing there, just staring. Not at me, but at the closed casket in viewing room 1. He was incredibly tall and thin, wearing a dark suit that hung loosely on his frame. His back was to me, but I could see his profile. Sharp features, unnaturally pale skin. At first, I figured it was just a family member who'd arrived early. It happens sometimes. People need that private moment before the crowds come in. I cleared my throat and called out, "Excuse me, sir. The viewing isn't until tomorrow morning at 9. He didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. He just kept staring at that casket with this intense focus that made my skin crawl. "Sir?" I tried again, louder this time. "I'm sorry, but you'll need to come back tomorrow." Nothing. It was like he couldn't hear me at all. Just then, the phone at the reception desk rang, making me jump. I glanced away for literally 2 seconds to look at the phone, and when I looked back, he was gone. Completely vanished. There'd been no sound of footsteps, no opening door, nothing. I'll admit I was rattled. I walked over to viewing room 1 and looked around, half expecting him to be hiding somewhere, but the room was empty. The casket was still closed, exactly as I'd left it earlier. I checked the front entrance, locked, with the alarm still armed. No way anyone could have come in or out without me knowing. My next thought was to check the security cameras. We have basic surveillance set up, nothing fancy, just enough to monitor the main areas. I pulled up the footage from the last hour and watched carefully. There I was, walking into the viewing room, looking around, confused, then checking the front door. But there was no tall man in a dark suit. According to the footage, I'd been alone the entire time. I told myself I was just tired. Working with the dead for over a decade doesn't bother me, but the long hours can mess with your head. I finished up with Mr. Calloway, locked everything down, and went home, convincing myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The next day was normal. Mr. Calloway's viewing went fine, lots of people showed up, and nobody mentioned anything strange. By evening, I'd almost forgotten about the incident. Almost. Despite my better judgment, I found myself back at the funeral home that night. We had another body coming in the next morning, and I told myself I needed to prep the room. But honestly, I think I wanted to prove to myself that I hadn't seen anything unusual the night before. It was around 10:45 when it happened again. I was in the preparation room, cleaning up and getting ready to lock up for the night. I was washing my hands at the sink when I noticed something in the reflection of the window above it. Movement, a dark shape. I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone behind me, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the window, though, the reflection was still there. The tall, thin man in the dark suit was standing right behind me in the reflection, staring directly at me with these hollow eyes, but when I turned around, there was nobody there. I can't explain the level of terror I felt in that moment. It was like my blood had turned to ice. I stood there, frozen, watching the reflection as it slowly tilted its head like it was studying me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only seconds before I finally managed to tear my eyes away. I didn't even finish cleaning up. I grabbed my coat and keys and ran straight for the door, not looking back once. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes, trying to calm down enough to drive. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation, a trick of the light, my imagination running wild, anything but what it seemed to be. I almost called Dave that night to quit. I even had my phone in my hand ready to dial. But what would I say? That I'd seen a ghost? That some figure was appearing in reflections but not in reality? He'd think I was losing it. So instead, I did the stupidest thing possible. I decided to go back the next night. I know. In horror movies, this is when everyone screams at the screen for the idiot to run away. But I needed to understand what was happening. Maybe I was having some kind of mental break. Maybe there was a logical explanation I was missing. Either way, I had to know. Friday night, I arrived at the funeral home around 10. Everything seemed normal at first. I went through my usual routine, trying to act like it was just another night at work. We had a viewing scheduled for Saturday morning, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson. Her casket was set up in viewing room 2, closed and ready for tomorrow. By 11:30, nothing had happened, and I was starting to feel both relieved and stupid. I was just grabbing my coat to leave when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a lock turning. It came from viewing room 2. My first thought was that someone had broken in, which was scary enough on its own. I took out my phone and pulled up our security camera app. The feed from viewing room 2 loaded, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The casket, Mrs. Henderson's casket that I had definitely closed and secured earlier, was now open. Not just slightly ajar, but fully open. The lid was raised completely, but I couldn't see inside from the camera angle. What I could see was that there was nobody else in the room. Nobody visible, at least. I should have left right then. Everything in me was screaming to get out of there. But something kept me rooted to the spot, staring at my phone screen in horror. That's when the camera feed started to glitch. The image became distorted, static cutting across the screen. Through the interference, I could see something beginning to rise from the casket. Something tall and thin. That was it for me. I dropped my phone and ran. I didn't stop to lock up, didn't even turn off the lights. I just ran straight to my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Once inside my car with the doors locked, I somehow found the courage to check the camera feed again. The app was still open on my phone, but now the image was clear. The footage showed me turning off the lights in the preparation room, grabbing my coat, and then the casket lid slowly moved upward, as if someone inside was pushing it open. But nobody came out. The lid just stayed open, like an invitation. I quit the next day. I called Dave first thing in the morning and told him I couldn't work there anymore. He asked why, of course, but I couldn't tell him the truth. I made up some bullshit about family issues and needing to relocate. He was disappointed but understanding. I've been unemployed for almost 2 months now. I can't bring myself to work in another funeral home, and honestly, I'm not sure what kind of job I even want anymore. All I know is that I never want to set foot in Ravenwood Funeral Home again. I still don't know what I saw those 3 nights. Was it a ghost? Some kind of hallucination? A bizarre prank? None of the explanations I've come up with make any sense. The security footage never showed the tall man, only me and that opening casket. But I know what I saw. I know it was real. The worst part is the feeling that hasn't gone away. Even now, sitting in my apartment miles away from Ravenwood, I sometimes get that sensation again, like someone's watching me. Like if I were to look in a mirror or a window at just the right angle, I'd see him standing there. That tall, thin figure in the dark suit staring at me with those empty eyes. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I can feel him standing right behind me. But I never turn around to check. I don't think I could handle seeing nothing there, or worse, seeing him in the flesh after all this time. I don't know why this happened to me or what it means. All I know is that something followed me home from Ravenwood, and I don't think it's ever going to leave. Story 11. I've been driving trucks for 23 years, seen pretty much everything you can imagine on America's highways. Weird stuff in small towns, crazy drivers, animals you wouldn't believe, weather that'll make you question your life choices. But what happened to me 2 months ago off I-80 in Nebraska, I still can't explain it. I haven't told many people. My wife thinks I had some kind of breakdown from exhaustion. Maybe she's right, but I know what I experienced. It was the second week of January, one of those brutal Midwest winters where the temperature hasn't seen the positive side of 0 in days. I was hauling electronics from Chicago to Denver, already 14 hours into my drive and fighting to stay awake. The dispatcher had been warning us all day about a nasty blizzard system moving in faster than expected. I figured I could make it to North Platte before it hit, but the snow started coming down hard just past Grand Island. By the time I reached that little rest stop, you know, the one about 40 miles east of North Platte, sits all by itself with just a small cafe and gas station, visibility was down to maybe 15 feet, wind howling so loud it was rattling my cab. I pulled in mainly because I couldn't see the road anymore, and I noticed only 2 other vehicles there, an old pickup and what looked like a station wagon, both already covered in snow. The place looked run down even through the blizzard. Faded sign, dim lights, the kind of spot you'd normally pass without a second thought. But I needed coffee and a bathroom break before attempting to wait out the storm in my sleeper. When I walked in, the bell above the door jingled, but nobody looked up. There was an old guy nursing a coffee at the counter and a middle-aged couple in a booth near the back talking in hushed voices. Behind the counter was this waitress, Darlene, according to her name tag, probably in her 50s, with this perpetually worried look on her face. "Coffee, black, and whatever sandwich you've got that's hot," I said, sliding onto a stool 2 spaces away from the old-timer. Darlene poured the coffee without a word, then leaned in closer than necessary when she set it down. "You planning on staying the night here?" she asked, her voice low. "Just until the storm lets up enough to see the road," I answered. She glanced toward the window, where the snow was now swirling in violent gusts. "Might be smart to push on to North Platte if you can. This stop gets strange during blizzards." I laughed, thinking she was trying to scare the out-of-towner. "Strange how?" She didn't smile back. "People go missing. Back in '97, trucker about your age pulled in during a storm like this. Never made it back on the road. They found him 2 weeks later in a field 5 miles from here." "What happened to him?" I asked, more to be polite than anything. "Official report said exposure, but Bobby, he was the one who found him, said the man's face was—" She trailed off, glancing at the old-timer, who was suddenly very interested in his coffee. "Was what?" "Frozen in fear, and his eyes had gone white, all white." She shook her head. "Anyway, sandwich will be up in 5 minutes." I nodded, chalking it up to typical small-town folklore. Every rest stop between Maine and California has some ghost story attached to it. It's how locals entertain themselves and freak out travelers. I ate quickly, paid, and headed back to my truck. By then, the storm had intensified. The snow was coming down so hard it seemed to be falling sideways, and the wind was screaming across the parking lot. I had to fight to open my door against the gale. My plan was simple: get a few hours of sleep in the sleeper cab, then continue when the storm let up. I made sure my doors were locked, drew the privacy curtain, and crawled into my bunk. Despite the howling wind and the occasional creaking of my truck as gusts hit it, I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up disoriented at what my phone said was 2:17 in the morning. At first, I couldn't figure out what had woken me until I heard it again. My CB radio was crackling with static. I hadn't left it on. I pushed aside the curtain and reached for the radio, thinking maybe I'd bumped it before going to sleep. As I adjusted the volume, a voice broke through the static. "Anybody? Help. Rest stop mile marker 243. That was my location, exactly where I was parked. I grabbed the handset. "This is Big Red. Who's calling?" More static then. "They're not letting me leave. They come when you sleep. They're hungry. Always hungry." The voice sounded distorted, like it was coming through layers of interference. I tried again. "Who is this? Where are you at the rest stop?" The radio went silent for maybe 30 seconds. Then the voice returned, clearer this time. "Look outside. See the tracks. They're already circling your truck." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. I peered through my frost-covered windows, but couldn't see much of anything in the swirling snow. Something about that voice felt wrong. The tone was flat, almost mechanical. Still, I couldn't just ignore someone who might be in trouble. I pulled on my coat and boots, grabbed my flashlight, and braced myself before opening the door. The cold hit me like a physical blow, and snow immediately began piling into my cab. I closed the door quickly and trudged toward the cafe. The building was completely dark. I cupped my hands against the window and shone my flashlight inside. Empty. I tried the door. Locked. The gas station was dark too. If someone had called for help, they weren't in either building. That's when I noticed the tracks in the snow. At first I thought they were just mine, but as I swung my flashlight around, I realized these were different. They circled my truck, completely around it, multiple times, and they didn't look quite right. Too long, too narrow, and spaced oddly, like whatever made them had an unusual gait. My heart started pounding harder. I headed back to my truck, moving faster now. When I reached it, my stomach dropped. The driver's side door was open, swinging slightly in the wind, despite me distinctly remembering closing it behind me. I swept my flashlight across the cab before climbing in. Nothing seemed disturbed, but it was freezing inside now, snow already accumulating on the seats. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then tried to start the engine to get the heater going. Nothing happened, not even a click. Dead battery. I tried the radio again. No power there either. My phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual in remote areas during storms, but now it felt ominous. I was completely cut off. That's when I heard it. a soft thump on the roof of my cab. I froze, listening. It could have been snow falling from a tree, except there were no trees nearby. Then it came again and again, rhythmic, like footsteps. The footsteps moved slowly from the back of the cab toward the front, directly above my head. Then they stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the wind. Then the scratching started. It was gentle at first, almost exploratory, like something trying to find a way in. Then it became more insistent, more deliberate. I watched in horror as the metal of my roof began to dent inward, just slightly at first, then more pronounced with each scratch. Whatever was up there was pressing down with impossible force. The roof began to groan under the pressure. I scrambled into the passenger seat, then into the back, trying to get away from the deepening impression. A hairline crack appeared in my windshield, then spread rapidly across the glass. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the windshield suddenly shattered inward, sending glass and snow exploding into the cab. And then I saw them, 3 figures crouched on the hood of my truck, silhouetted against the swirling snow. They were humanoid, but wrong, too thin, limbs too long, skin a sickly pale gray that seemed to absorb my flashlight's beam rather than reflect it. Their eyes caught the light though, shining back like an animal's, but with an intelligent, hungry awareness. One of them smiled, a terrible stretching of its face that revealed too many teeth, each one needle-sharp. It tilted its head, studying me with an almost curious expression, before reaching one long-fingered hand through the broken windshield. I lunged for the door handle, fighting with it as the thing's fingers stretched toward me, impossibly extending across the distance. I finally got the door open and tumbled out into the snow, scrambling to my feet and running blindly into the storm. I could hear them behind me, not footsteps exactly, but a strange shuffling, sliding sound. I didn't look back. I ran toward the cafe, praying the door would be unlocked now, that someone would be there. It wasn't. I pressed myself against it, finally turning to face whatever was chasing me. The parking lot was empty. Nothing moved in the swirling snow except the wind-driven flakes themselves. My truck sat where I'd left it, but even from this distance I could see the windshield was completely shattered, the roof dented inward as if something massive had pressed down on it. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the small space between the ice machine and the wall of the cafe, using my body heat to keep from freezing to death. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I started to drift off, I heard that voice again in my head. They come when you sleep. They're hungry, always hungry. When morning came, the storm had passed. A highway patrol officer found me, practically frozen, still wedged behind the ice machine. My truck was exactly as I'd left it. Windshield shattered, roof. Dented doors open with snow filling the cab. They blamed it on the storm, said wind could do strange things. The officer, Jennings was his name, kept looking at the scratches on the roof though, running his fingers along them with a troubled expression. He asked me strange questions too about what frequency my CB had been set to, whether I'd heard any local legends about the place. I left my truck there. Couldn't bring myself to drive it again. The company wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I took a bus home and haven't driven since. Sometimes I still hear that voice on the edge of sleep. They're hungry, always hungry. And I force myself to wake up, no matter how tired I am. I don't know what happened at that rest stop. I don't want to know, but I'll never drive through Nebraska in winter again. And if you're on I-80 during a blizzard, keep driving. Don't stop, no matter what. Story 12. I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about that night in March of 2002. 21 years later, and I still can't make sense of what happened. I was a desk sergeant at Detroit PD's Eastern District back then, not the kind of guy who believes in conspiracy theories or supernatural stuff, just a regular cop trying to do my job and get home to my family. It was March 11th. I remember because it was my daughter's birthday the next day, and I'd promised to take the morning off to make her pancakes. I was pulling the midnight to 8 shift, which nobody wants, but seniority wasn't on my side yet. Thompson and Parker were on patrol that night. Good cops, both of them. Pete Thompson had been on the force for almost 12 years by then. Quiet guy, kept to himself mostly, but sharp as hell. The kind who notices things others miss. James Parker was younger, maybe 4 years on the job. Ambitious, wanted to make detective, always volunteering for the tough assignments. They'd been acting weird for a couple weeks before that night. Pete had mentioned something about feeling like someone was watching him when he was off duty. I brushed it off as paranoia. We all get it sometimes in this line of work. Parker seemed jumpy too, but I figured they were just stressed about this cold case they'd reopened. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but word gets around. Some businessman with connections to the Zerilli family had been implicated in a homicide back in the 90s, but the case mysteriously went cold. Thompson had stumbled onto something while going through old files and got Parker involved. They were working it off the books, which should have been my first clue something wasn't right. Anyway, that night started like any other. They checked in with dispatch at 11:47, nothing unusual, standard patrol through the factory district. I remember because I was the one who took the call. Pete's voice sounded normal, maybe a little tired, but nothing that raised any red flags. At 12:32, dispatch tried to reach them about a domestic disturbance call. No response. We tried again at 12:35, 12:40, and 12:45. Nothing. Not unusual in itself. Sometimes officers step away from the radio or there's a dead zone. But after 30 minutes of silence, protocol is to send someone to check. I sent Ramirez and Johnson to their last known location. They reported back 20 minutes later that they'd found car 347, Thompson and Parker's squad car, parked in this abandoned lot next to the old Packard plant. The vehicle was unlocked, lights off, no sign of a struggle. Here's where it gets weird. Their guns, badges, and utility belts were laid out perfectly on the hood of the car. Not thrown or scattered, arranged neatly like someone had deliberately placed them there. Inside the car they found Parker's coffee, still warm, and Thompson's half-eaten sandwich. Their personal phones were on the seats. Thompson's wallet with $43 and all his cards. Parker's St. Michael medallion that he never took off was on the dashboard. I went to the scene myself. It was freezing that night, around 20 degrees, with this misty drizzle that froze on contact, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The lot was muddy, full of broken glass and rusted metal from the factory days. The streetlights nearby were out, not unusual for that part of Detroit back then, so we were working with flashlights and the headlights from our cars. The first thing that hit me was how quiet it was. Detroit's never quiet, even at night, but this place felt dead. No traffic noise, no distant sirens, nothing. Just the sound of our boots in the mud and the occasional crackle of the radio. We found blood, just a few drops, leading away from the car. Later tests confirmed it was Parker's. The trail went about 20 feet, then just stopped. Not like someone had cleaned it up, more like, I don't know, like he'd suddenly stopped bleeding, or wasn't there anymore. I found Thompson's notebook on the ground near the blood drops. Pete was old school, always kept a small notepad in his shirt pocket. Most of it was routine stuff, license plate numbers, names, times. But on the last page, scrawled in handwriting that didn't even look like Thompson's, were the words, "They found us." The pen had dug so deep into the paper it tore through in places. We pulled security footage from a camera on a building across the street. The timestamp showed 12:18 a.m. You can see their car pull into the lot, normal speed, normal stop. Both officers get out, looking at something off camera. They don't have their weapons drawn. They don't look scared. They walk toward whatever they're seeing, then just walk out of frame, calmly, like they're following someone they know. The camera angle doesn't show what they were approaching. We launched a full-scale search. Helicopters, K9 units, the works, nothing. It was like they vanished into thin air. Their families were devastated. Thompson had 2 kids. Parker was engaged. The department was in shock. These weren't rookies who might panic and desert. These were solid cops who'd vanished without explanation. The investigation hit wall after wall. We interviewed everyone who knew them, checked their finances, their computers, their phone records, nothing unusual. The only lead we had was this cold case they'd been looking into. Some businessman named Aldridge who'd allegedly ordered a hit on a competitor back in '94. The case file was incomplete, pages missing, evidence gone, like someone had sanitized it. Then 3 months later, in June, a package arrived at the station addressed to the chief. Inside was Thompson's service revolver, completely disassembled. Every piece clean and laid out on a black cloth. With it was a note that just said, "Some doors should remain closed." No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing to trace. I was there when the chief opened it. I'll never forget the look on his face. Not shock or anger, fear, pure fear. He ordered the investigation classified and assigned it to Internal Affairs, said it was because of potential department corruption, but I think he was scared of what we might find. I kept digging on my own time. It cost me my marriage and nearly my job, but I couldn't let it go. Pete and James deserved better. 5 years later, in 2007, a metal container was found by construction workers renovating an old building downtown. Inside were personal items belonging to Thompson and Parker. Pete's watch that his father had given him, Parker's engagement ring he'd been planning to give his fiancée the weekend after they disappeared. But there was something else in that container that still keeps me up at night. Letters, handwritten letters from both officers, dated 2014, 7 years in the future at that point. The letters described crimes that hadn't happened yet. A bank robbery in 2008, a serial killer who wouldn't start killing until 2010. The exact date and circumstances of our mayor's resignation in 2013, details no one could have known. I kept copies before the FBI swooped in and took everything. Every single prediction in those letters came true, exactly as written. The bank robbery happened on the exact date, with the exact amount stolen. The serial killer used the same signature described in the letters. The mayor resigned on the exact day mentioned, citing the exact reasons outlined. The handwriting analysis confirmed it was theirs. But how? How could they have known? Were they somehow seeing the future? Are they somewhere else in time? Here's the part I've never told anyone. 2 years ago, I was working late at the station. It was around 2 a.m. and I was alone in the communications room. Suddenly, car 347, Thompson and Parker's old squad car, which had been sitting in the evidence impound lot for almost 2 decades, started broadcasting on the radio. Static at first, then Thompson's voice, clear as day, saying, "This is Unit 347 requesting backup. We are in pursuit of..." Then more static, and "Not what we thought. They're not." Then nothing. I checked the impound lot the next morning. The car was there, battery dead, radio disconnected. It was physically impossible for it to have transmitted anything. The official investigation remains open but inactive. Thompson and Parker are still listed as missing officers. Their families have given up hope. Most of the detectives who worked the case have retired or moved on. But I know something happened that night that defies explanation. I've spent 21 years trying to make sense of it. Was it organized crime silencing cops who got too close? Some kind of government conspiracy? Or something else? Something worse? I'm retiring next month. My daughter, the one whose birthday pancakes I made the morning after they disappeared, says I need to let it go, that it's consumed too much of my life already. Maybe she's right, but sometimes late at night I swear I hear Thompson's voice on the radio again, calling for backup that will never come. And I wonder if somewhere, somehow, they're still out there, still waiting for help. And I wonder what they found that night, and what found them. Story 13. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. My hands are still shaky typing this out, but I need to warn others. This happened 3 weeks ago, and I still haven't been able to sleep properly since. I live about 40 minutes outside of Florianopolis in a pretty remote area. It's usually peaceful, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and nothing ever happens. My parents live even further out in the countryside, and I visit them every Sunday for dinner. That's our tradition. That Sunday seemed completely normal. Mom made her famous feijoada, Dad talked about his garden, and we watched some terrible reality TV show together. I stayed longer than I planned because Mom kept insisting I try her new dessert recipe. By the time I left, it was already past 11 at night. The drive back is always a bit creepy. There's this 20-minute stretch where you don't see a single house, just dense forest on both sides and barely any streetlights. I usually blast music to distract myself, but that night my Bluetooth wasn't connecting properly, so I was driving in near silence, just the sound of my tires on the asphalt. I was about halfway through that isolated stretch when I saw something in my headlights. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as I got closer, I realized it was a massive tree trunk lying across the entire road. It was huge. There was absolutely no way to drive around it. The road is narrow there, with ditches on both sides. "You've got to be kidding me," I remember saying out loud to myself. I sat there for a minute with my high beams pointing at this enormous obstacle, trying to figure out what to do. Going back to my parents would add another hour to my night, and I had work early the next morning. Plus, the detour route is even darker and more isolated. I decided to see if I could move it. In retrospect, that was so stupid of me, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I was tired and annoyed and just wanted to get home. I put on my hazard lights, grabbed my phone flashlight, and got out of the car. The night was eerily quiet. No crickets, no distant traffic, nothing. Just dead silence. The air felt unusually cold for Florianopolis, even giving me goosebumps. As I approached the trunk, something felt off. It didn't look like it had fallen naturally. There were no broken branches nearby, no signs of the rest of the tree. It was just this perfect cylinder of wood placed perfectly across the road. But I was too focused on getting home to really process what that meant. The trunk was heavy as hell, but I managed to grab one end and drag it just enough to create space for my car to pass. My hands got all scraped up from the bark, and I was sweating despite the cold. It took maybe 5 minutes of struggling, but I finally moved it enough. That's when I noticed headlights in the distance behind me. I hadn't seen or heard any car approach, which was strange considering how quiet everything was. Relief washed over me. At least I wasn't alone out here anymore. Maybe they could help me move the trunk completely off the road. I hurried back to my car, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable on the empty road. As I got in and closed the door, I saw in my rearview mirror that the other car had stopped about 30 meters behind mine. They didn't honk or flash their lights to signal me. They just waited. Something about this made my stomach drop. Why weren't they driving around the partially moved trunk? There was definitely enough space now. Why weren't they coming to check if I needed help? I didn't wait to find out. I started my car and carefully maneuvered around the trunk, keeping an eye on the other vehicle in my mirrors. As soon as I was back on the road, I accelerated, hoping to put some distance between us. That's when things got terrifying. The car behind me started moving too, keeping the exact same distance. Not closer, not farther, like they were measuring it. I sped up a little more, and they matched my speed perfectly. "It's nothing," I told myself. "They're just headed the same way." But my gut was screaming that something was very wrong. To test my theory, I took a sudden turn onto a side road that definitely wasn't the way to my house. It's a route I know leads to a small farming community, but it adds at least 20 minutes to the journey. No one would take this road unless they specifically needed to go there. The headlights behind me made the same turn. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. I made another random turn onto an even smaller dirt road. Again, the car followed. By now, I was in full panic mode. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I was struggling to think clearly. I knew this area had terrible cell reception, so calling for help wasn't reliable. The nearest police station was at least 25 minutes away, and there weren't any open businesses nearby at this hour. I decided to try one more test. There was a lookout point coming up where tourists sometimes stop during the day to take photos of the valley. I pulled over there, pretending I was stopping to check something. The road was wide enough that they could easily pass me if they wanted to. They didn't pass. The car stopped about 20 meters behind me. I waited, clutching my phone even though I knew there was no signal. The car just sat there, headlights illuminating my rear window, making it impossible for me to see who was inside while they could see me perfectly. Then, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, I saw their doors open. Two men got out. Even in the darkness, I could tell they were large, much bigger than me. They didn't call out to ask if I needed help. They didn't wave. They just started walking toward my car, one on each side of the road. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that the tree trunk hadn't fallen naturally. It had been placed there deliberately. And I had done exactly what they wanted. I'd stopped and gotten out of my car in the middle of nowhere. Without thinking twice, I slammed my car into drive and floored it. My tires spun on the gravel before catching, and I shot forward down the road. In my rearview mirror, I saw the men running back to their car. I was driving way too fast for these roads, taking curves recklessly, praying I wouldn't hit an animal or drive into a ditch. The whole time, those headlights stayed behind me, sometimes falling back a bit on the curves, but always catching up on the straightaways. About 10 minutes of terrified driving later, I spotted the lights of a gas station in the distance. It was one of those old ones with just 2 pumps, and I wasn't even sure if it would be open, but it was my only hope. As I got closer, I saw a light on inside the small convenience store part. Thank God. I screeched into the parking lot and saw the car following me slow down as it approached. It drove past the entrance, slowly, and I caught a glimpse of the driver looking directly at me before they continued down the road. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial my phone. There was finally reception here. I called my stepdad, who's an ex-military guy and the calmest person I know in a crisis. When he answered, I burst into tears, barely able to explain what happened. He told me to stay exactly where I was, with the doors locked, and to tell the gas station attendant what was happening. He said he'd stay on the phone with me until I was safe. The attendant, an older man, was incredibly kind. He let me sit behind the counter with him and even made me a cup of terrible coffee that I couldn't drink because my hands wouldn't stop trembling. He told me that I wasn't the first person to come in scared like this. Apparently, there had been rumors about people setting up road traps on the isolated stretches around here, but the police hadn't found enough evidence to do anything about it. My stepdad arrived 30 minutes later with my mom. He'd been checking the roads the entire drive over, making sure no one was following them. We reported everything to the police the next day, but without a license plate or clear description of the men or their car, there wasn't much they could do. They did send a patrol to check the area where I'd found the trunk, but by then it was gone. I've since learned that this is actually a known tactic in some areas. Criminals place obstacles in the road, forcing drivers to stop and get out. When you're occupied with the obstacle, you're vulnerable. The fact that they followed me even after I got back in my car suggests they were particularly persistent or desperate. I still drive to my parents' house every Sunday, but now I go in the morning and leave before dark. My stepdad bought me pepper spray and a super bright tactical flashlight that also works as a baton. I've memorized every police station location in the area, but most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I don't know what those men wanted from me that night. Maybe my car, maybe my belongings, maybe something much worse. All I know is that a fallen tree trunk in the middle of nowhere is never just a fallen tree trunk, and I'm only alive to warn you because I was lucky enough to realize it just in time. Story 14. I still struggle to write this down even after so many years. What happened at Silver Pine Lodge in February of 2008 haunts me every single day, but I need to share this, if only to warn others. My husband Michael and I had been planning our 10th anniversary trip for months. We're both workaholics, me with my neuropsychiatry practice at Johns Hopkins, him with his environmental engineering firm. We desperately needed time away from everything, somewhere remote and peaceful. Silver Pine Lodge in Montana seemed perfect. Isolated cabins, beautiful scenery, and the promise of being completely disconnected from work. We arrived on February 10th. The drive up had been gorgeous, with snow-covered pines lining the winding mountain roads. I remember feeling a weight lift off my shoulders as we pulled up to the main lodge. It was this beautiful timber building with a massive stone fireplace in the center of the great room. The manager, Tom, greeted us warmly and helped us check in to cabin 17. I brought my video camera to document our trip. It sounds silly now, but I'd gotten into the habit of recording our vacations after missing so many moments being buried in work. Michael always teased me about it, but he'd humor me by waving at the camera or striking ridiculous poses. The first 2 days were perfect. We hiked, relaxed by the fire, and reconnected in a way we hadn't in years. I remember feeling so grateful for the quiet and the isolation. God, what a terrible irony that turned out to be. The weather forecast had mentioned the possibility of a storm, but none of us expected the blizzard that hit on February 12th. It came out of nowhere. I was filming the sunset when the sky suddenly darkened. Within an hour, snow was falling so heavily we could barely see the trees 30 feet from our cabin. The wind picked up, howling against the windows with this unnerving, almost rhythmic quality. The power went out around 7 that evening. Michael lit the fireplace and some candles while I called the main lodge. Tom assured us they had a generator running and invited us to come up if we wanted, but we decided to stay put. We had food, water, and each other. It felt cozy, even romantic. That's when the scratching started. It was faint at first, just a light scraping against the exterior wall near our bedroom. Michael dismissed it as branches in the wind, but there was something deliberate about the sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. I remember whispering to him, "There aren't any trees that close to the cabin on that side." He went to check the windows, and that's when I decided to turn the camera back on. I don't know why. Maybe some instinct that what was happening needed to be documented. The battery was low, but I had a spare. While Michael was checking the bedroom window, the scratching stopped. We both laughed nervously about being jumpy city folks not used to the wilderness. We made hot chocolate and tried to enjoy the evening by candlelight. Around 9:30, I went to the bathroom and noticed something through the small window. At first, I thought it was just the way the snow was falling in the darkness, creating shapes. But when I looked closer, I realized with absolute certainty that there were figures standing in the snow, not moving, just standing perfectly still, watching our cabin. "Michael," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you come here for a second?" He joined me, and I pointed them out. There were at least 4 or 5 dark silhouettes evenly spaced around our cabin about 20 yards out. "It's probably other guests," he said, but his voice had that forced calm that told me he didn't believe it. "In this storm, just standing there?" I asked. We checked every window in the cabin and realized the figures had us completely surrounded. At least 8 of them, all standing perfectly still in the blizzard. No one could stand that still in those temperatures. No one. That's when the scratching returned, but different this time. It wasn't coming from one spot anymore. It was happening all around the cabin, on every exterior wall, simultaneously. Then it changed to tapping. Synchronized tapping that formed a distinct pattern. My specialized training kicked in. As a neuropsychiatrist, I've studied patterns of communication, including Morse code and other symbolic languages. This wasn't random. It had structure, rhythm, repetition. I grabbed a notepad and started writing it down, trying to decode it. Michael thought I was losing my mind, focusing on this while there were people, or something, surrounding our cabin. "We need to call the main lodge again," Michael said, picking up the phone. His face fell. Lines dead. I was still recording everything. The camera caught the moment we both froze as one of the kitchen windows shattered inward. The tapping stopped immediately. The silence that followed was worse than any noise could have been. Something came in through that window. I never got a clear look at it. The camera caught snippets, a dark mass moving with unnatural fluidity, neither fully solid nor gaseous. Michael shouted for me to run to the bathroom and lock the door while he dealt with it. I ran, clutching the camera, my hands shaking so badly I could barely lock the door. Through the wood, I heard Michael's voice change. It was still his voice, still his words and intonation, but underneath was this harmony, like multiple voices layered together, creating a sound no human vocal cords could produce. "Rebecca," he called, his voice resonating in a way that made my teeth vibrate. "You need to come out. I understand now. I understand the frequency." I pressed my back against the door, tears streaming down my face. "Michael, what's happening to you? They're showing me things, Rebecca. They need you to see too. They specifically need a neuropsychiatrist. They need to understand how human perception works to optimize the transition." Other voices joined his, all speaking in perfect unison with that same harmonic undertone. I recognized Tom's voice among them and some of the other guests we'd met at dinner the previous night. "We've seen past the surface of reality," they said together. "We understand now what exists in the spaces between perception. You'll understand too." Something hit the bathroom window hard enough to crack the glass. I screamed and dropped the camera. When I picked it up again, I saw dark, elongated fingers working their way through the broken pane, moving in ways fingers shouldn't bend. I made a split-second decision. The bathroom window was small, but I could fit through it. I pushed out the remaining glass, cutting my hands in the process, and squeezed through into the freezing night. The snow was up to my knees, the wind cutting through my clothes instantly, but adrenaline kept me moving. The dark figures were still there, but they were all facing the cabin now, as if they hadn't noticed me escaping. I ran as fast as I could through the deep snow toward the main lodge, constantly looking back over my shoulder. None of them followed me. That scared me more than if they had chased me. The main lodge was lit by emergency lighting when I burst through the doors. It seemed normal at first, a few guests huddled by the fireplace, staff members distributing candles and blankets. But something was off about all of them. Their movements were too smooth, too coordinated. They all turned to look at me simultaneously when I entered. I spoke directly to the camera then, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "This isn't mass hysteria, this is real. It's some kind of invasion. They're trying to understand us from the inside out. I found records in the lodge office earlier today. Similar incidents happened here in 1967, 1984, and 1996. Always during severe weather events, always with missing persons afterward." I was backing toward the door as I spoke, planning to run to one of the vehicles parked outside, but then Tom entered from a side room. He wasn't walking, he was gliding, his feet barely touching the floor. His skin had a translucence to it that revealed shadowy movements beneath the surface. Behind him were multiple figures, all moving with that same unnatural fluidity. "Dr. Lansing," he said, his voice carrying that same impossible harmonic quality. "We've been waiting for someone like you, someone who understands the human mind. You'll help us perfect the process." That's where the footage ends. I remember dropping the camera as they surrounded me. I remember screaming. And then, nothing clear until the rescue team arrived 2 days later when the storm cleared. They found all 29 of us alive, all 18 guests and 11 staff members. We were all sitting calmly in the main lodge as if nothing had happened. According to the medical reports, we were suffering from hypothermia and mild carbon monoxide poisoning from the faulty generator, which supposedly explained our mass hallucination. But the blood work they did showed something they couldn't explain. All of us had anomalous hemoglobin structures, different from normal human blood. They attributed it to some kind of mountain sickness or rare condition triggered by the carbon monoxide. Within 6 months, 18 of us had relocated to coastal regions, including Michael and me. We now run a research facility focused on deep marine biology and neurological adaptation. My colleagues think it's fascinating work bridging two seemingly unrelated fields. They don't understand that we're preparing. The things at Silver Pine Lodge were just scouts. The real ones are coming from the ocean depths. We're making sure humanity will be ready to optimize the transition. Sometimes, when I look at Michael while he sleeps, I see his skin turn translucent. Sometimes, I catch myself standing perfectly still for hours, facing the ocean. Sometimes, I hear the tapping pattern again, coming from inside my own head. The maintenance workers found my camera in cabin 17 in October. I don't remember leaving it there. I don't remember a lot of things anymore, but I remember enough to know that what happened at Silver Pine Lodge wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Story 15. I've been debating whether to post this for years. I was one of the junior researchers at Del Mar Neurological Research Institute during the summer of 2017, and what happened there still haunts me. I'm breaking my NDA because people deserve to know the truth. I started at Del Mar in early 2016 as a postdoc under Dr. Eleanor Voss. She was brilliant, intimidating but inspiring. We were working on neural implants for Parkinson's patients, and our results were promising enough that we secured federal funding for what became Project Resonance. That's when everything changed. The project was classified, but I can tell you it focused on direct brain-to-computer communication. We developed a non-invasive interface that could read neural signals with unprecedented clarity. Dr. Voss was particularly interested in what she called coherent neural states, essentially synchronizing brain activity between multiple people. I remember the day of the first anomaly so clearly. It was a Tuesday in May, hot as hell in the lab because the AC was struggling. We were running a phase 3 trial with 6 volunteer subjects. These were all people with various neurological conditions who'd signed up hoping for treatment breakthroughs. During the test, all 6 subjects simultaneously reported hearing a voice speaking through the static. This freaked us out because there was no audio component in our protocol. When we interviewed them separately, they all described identical auditory hallucinations, a voice reciting sequences of prime numbers. We checked the equipment obsessively, thinking there must be some kind of interference or feedback loop. Nothing. Even more disturbing, the phenomena continued even after we completely powered down the equipment. Dr. Voss was fascinated rather than concerned. I remember her face, this intense focus I'd never seen before. She started working longer hours, sleeping in her office. The rest of us were uneasy, but her enthusiasm was contagious. We told ourselves we were on the verge of something groundbreaking. A few weeks later, Dr. Voss introduced a refined algorithm designed to amplify neural connections. We ran an 8-hour test with 12 participants. About 3 hours in, I noticed something strange on the monitors. All subjects had stopped responding to external stimuli, but their vital signs and brainwave patterns were in perfect synchronicity. Not just similar, identical, down to the millisecond. When we tried to terminate the experiment, things got scary. All 12 subjects had seizure-like symptoms, their bodies contorting while their faces remained eerily calm. When they finally stabilized, they all reported the same thing: coherent visual and auditory hallucinations of non-human origin. They described a vast, incomprehensible intelligence attempting to communicate through the neural interface. One older man, Terry, tried to explain it to me while I was checking his vitals. "It's like trying to understand the ocean by looking at a single drop of water," he said. His hands were shaking. "It's aware of us now. It's curious." Any reasonable research team would have halted the project right there, but Dr. Voss intensified it. She developed a theory that we had accidentally accessed what she called a non-local consciousness field, something that existed independently of individual minds. She started talking about quantum entanglement between neurons across different brains. Most of the team was skeptical, but the data was compelling. Something was happening that defied conventional neuroscience. July 7th was when everything went to hell. I remember the date because it was my birthday, and I'd been planning to leave early. Around 10 in the morning, Dr. Voss called 6 senior researchers into the primary lab for what she described as a quick demonstration. She'd never included me in the inner circle, so I wasn't invited. By late afternoon, nobody had seen them. The lab door was locked from the inside. Security cameras showed they'd never left. Calls to their phones went unanswered. Around 7 p.m., security finally overrode the locks. What we found inside still gives me nightmares. All 7 of them, Dr. Voss and the 6 researchers, were unconscious. The equipment was destroyed, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. But the most disturbing thing was the writing. Thousands of pages of handwritten equations covered every surface: walls, floors, computer screens. They'd even written on their own skin when they ran out of space, the same mathematical sequences, over and over, with subtle variations. I helped get them to the ambulances. Dr. Voss was the worst. Her eyes were open but completely unresponsive, pupils dilated to the point where her irises were barely visible. She was mumbling numbers constantly. Her fingers kept moving like she was still writing. All 7 were hospitalized with extreme sleep deprivation, neurological damage, and what the doctors called acute shared delusional syndrome. I visited Dr. Voss a week later. The hospital had strict protocols. No electronic devices allowed near her after several unexplained equipment failures in her room. Her brain scans were like nothing the neurologists had ever seen. Her neural activity displayed patterns impossible to generate through normal brain function, precisely matching the transmission frequency of our experimental interface. When I got back to the facility after the incident, things got even weirder. All digital storage devices in the facility contained the same mathematical sequence found written throughout the laboratory. Any new device brought near the West Wing spontaneously began displaying the same patterns. I watched it happen to my own phone. The screen suddenly flashed, went black, and then displayed scrolling equations I couldn't understand. The NSF suspended our funding immediately. They brought in a containment team that looked more military than scientific. They questioned each of us for hours, made us sign additional NDAs, and then basically told us to forget everything we'd seen. But how could I forget what happened to our test subjects? Of the original 12, 3 committed suicide within weeks of the incident. Each left identical notes containing only that same prime number sequence. I attended Terry's funeral. His wife showed me his home office where he'd covered the walls with the same equations we'd found in the lab. He had no access to those equations, no way to know them. Dr. Voss remained hospitalized until December 2017. I visited her a few times, though each visit left me more disturbed. Electronic equipment frequently malfunctioned in her presence. The hospital staff reported finding complex equations written in her room, despite having no access to writing materials. They would take away her pencils, and the next day find equations scratched into the paint with her fingernails. The official explanation was carbon monoxide poisoning, if you can believe that. 13 researchers hospitalized, 3 suicides, and they blamed a faulty ventilation system. The facility's West Wing was permanently closed, and the rest of us were reassigned or let go. I drive past the abandoned building sometimes. It looks normal from the outside, but cell reception drops completely within a half-mile radius. Local residents have reported unusual electrical disturbances affecting wireless communications and digital devices. I've verified this myself. Any digital storage device brought too close to the facility starts displaying those same patterns. Cell service providers have documented unexplained data usage from nearby towers, massive amounts of encrypted information, transmitted to unidentified recipients, always between 2 and 4 in the morning. Nobody investigates. The most terrifying part? Those mathematical sequences have started appearing in neural interface research worldwide. They show up spontaneously in systems with no connection to our original project. The pattern has been identified in the background radiation of digital communications globally, increasing in frequency and complexity since 2019. I've changed careers, moved across the country, and tried to forget. But sometimes my devices glitch in that familiar way. Sometimes I wake up at night with numbers on the tip of my tongue, and sometimes when it's very quiet, I swear I can hear that voice Terry described, speaking through the static, reaching out from somewhere vast and incomprehensible. Whatever we contacted is still there, still reaching out, still trying to communicate, and it's getting better at it. Story 16. I still get goosebumps typing this out, but I need to share what happened to me 3 months ago. I've always considered myself a pretty observant guy. Working night shifts at a warehouse for 5 years makes you notice patterns and changes in your surroundings. But this made me question everything about my sense of security. It started on a Tuesday in October. I remember because it had just rained, and the streets were still wet when I pulled into my neighborhood around 4:15 in the morning. I was exhausted after a 10-hour shift of inventory management and just wanted to crash. My neighborhood is usually dead quiet at that hour. Most people don't even leave for work until after 7. That's why the black sedan parked about 20 feet from my driveway immediately caught my attention. It wasn't just parked there. It was positioned in this weird way, like halfway between 2 houses, with the front facing my place. The windows were tinted dark, way darker than legal in our state. I slowed down as I passed it, trying to see if anyone was inside, but couldn't make out anything. I figured maybe someone was visiting a neighbor and had worked late, or maybe it was just someone who ran out of gas. Whatever. I was too tired to care. I pulled into my garage, closed the door behind me, and went inside. I remember taking a quick shower, making a sandwich, and falling asleep watching some mindless YouTube videos. Didn't think about the car again until the next night. Same time, around 4:15 a.m., same black sedan, same spot. Exactly the same spot, not a foot different. This time, I drove past it slowly, trying to get a better look. The windows were so dark that even with my headlights shining right at it, I couldn't see inside. My neighborhood isn't the kind of place where strange cars just hang out. We're not fancy or anything, but it's a quiet suburb where most people know each other at least by sight. I considered calling the non-emergency police line, but talked myself out of it. What would I say? There's a car parked legally on a public street? I'd sound paranoid. So I went home, but this time I double-checked all my doors and windows before going to bed. The third night is when it went from weird to creepy. Same car, same spot, same time. But this time, as I drove past, I swear I saw movement inside. Just a shadow shifting behind that dark glass. My stomach dropped. Someone was sitting in there, watching my house, watching me. I don't know why, but I didn't drive directly home. Instead, I circled the block, heart pounding, trying to figure out what to do. When I came around again, the car was still there. I decided to park in my driveway instead of the garage. I wanted to get a photo of the license plate. I pretended to be looking for something in my trunk while sneakily taking pictures with my phone. The whole time I could feel eyes on me. My hands were shaking so bad I wasn't sure if the photos would even come out clear. I went inside, locked everything, and checked the pictures. The license plate was visible, a standard state plate, nothing suspicious about it. I thought about calling the police again, but decided to wait. If the car showed up a fourth night, I'd definitely call. But the next night, the car wasn't there. I felt relieved, but also weirdly on edge. Had they moved on? Had they realized I was onto them? I kept checking my rearview mirror the whole drive home, paranoid I was being followed. That Friday, I had the day off and decided to go for a walk around 2 in the afternoon. The weather was nice, and I needed to clear my head after the weird week. I'd installed some basic security cameras around my house about a year ago after a series of package thefts in the neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just the kind that send alerts to your phone when they detect motion. I was about a mile from home when my phone buzzed with an alert. I opened the app, expecting to see the mail carrier or something. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. The camera in my bedroom had caught movement. Just a split second of it, someone walking past the doorway, someone inside my house. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at my phone. Maybe it was a glitch. I frantically checked the other cameras, but none of them had triggered. The bedroom camera hadn't picked up anything else either. I started walking back home quickly, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just a shadow from a passing car. but deep down, I knew better. I was about 2 blocks away when I heard it, the notification sound from my front door camera. This time, the footage showed nothing. The camera had triggered, but there was no one visible in the frame. That's when I knew for sure someone had figured out where the cameras were and was avoiding them. I stopped walking. My house was just around the corner now. Should I go back, call the police? What if I was overreacting? But then I heard it, the sound of footsteps inside my house. Through the open windows, I could hear someone moving around, heavy footsteps in the hallway, getting closer to the front of the house. I didn't think. I just ran, not toward my house, but away from it, into the small wooded area behind our neighborhood. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. When the dispatcher answered, I was breathing so hard I could barely speak. "Someone's in my house." I managed to get out, giving them my address. They told me to stay where I was and not to approach the house. Officers were being dispatched immediately. I hid behind a large oak tree, watching the street. Within minutes, 3 police cars arrived, lights flashing but sirens off. I watched as officers surrounded my house, guns drawn. 2 went in through the front, 1 covered the back. After what felt like an eternity, an officer found me in my hiding spot and brought me to one of the cruisers. They had searched the entire house and found no one inside, but they did find evidence someone had been there. My bedroom closet door was open, and some of my clothes had been moved around. Some of my mail was spread out on the kitchen counter, and most disturbingly, my toothbrush was wet, like someone had just used it. I gave them the license plate number from the black car and showed them the security footage. They took it all very seriously, especially when I mentioned the car had been watching my house for multiple nights. Less than 6 hours later, they called me. They'd found him. The license plate belonged to a 27-year-old man named Eric, who lived about 15 miles away. When they arrested him, he had my house key in his pocket. A copy of my house key. I still don't know how he got it. In his car, they found a high-powered camera with a telephoto lens. His phone contained hundreds of photos of my house, of me coming and going, of me through my windows at night. He had notes, pages and pages of notes, about my schedule, when I left for work, when I came home, what lights I turned on, how long my showers were, what I watched on TV. The most horrifying part was learning he'd been watching me for over 2 weeks before I even noticed the car. 2 weeks, and the police couldn't figure out how he'd managed to get into my house that day without triggering most of the cameras. The only explanation was that he'd been inside before, multiple times, learning the layout, figuring out where the cameras were and how to avoid them. They found fingerprints in places that made no sense. Inside my medicine cabinet, on the inside of my kitchen cabinets, on the back of my TV. Places you wouldn't touch unless you were spending time exploring. He'd been in my house while I was at work, while I was shopping, maybe even while I was sleeping. The detective told me Eric appeared to be suffering from some kind of mental illness. He was fixated on me specifically, though they couldn't determine why. I'd never met him before. I don't work with the public. I'm not on social media much. I'm literally the most boring person you could stalk. But for some reason, he chose me. They found a journal where he'd written about how he needed to protect me and needed to become me. He wrote about watching me sleep from the corner of my room. I haven't slept well since reading that. He's in jail now, denied bail, facing multiple felony charges. I've moved to a new house in a different neighborhood. I've installed a full security system with cameras everywhere. I check them constantly. I've changed all my routines. I park in different spots. I vary my routes home. I've even started wearing different clothes than I used to. But I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. I still jump at shadows. I still check my closets every night before bed. I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear footsteps. The police never could explain how he got into my house that day, or how many times he might have been there before. They never found any additional house keys on him or at his place. What if he made more copies? What if he wasn't working alone? It's been 3 months, and I'm still looking over my shoulder, still checking for black cars with tinted windows, still wondering if someone is watching me right now, learning my new patterns, waiting for the right moment. And the worst part? I'll never know how long he was watching before I noticed. I'll never know what he did in my house when I wasn't there. I'll never know if he stood over my bed while I slept. Some nights, I can almost feel the weight of someone's gaze on me in the darkness. I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. Story 17. I still can't believe what happened to me 3 days ago. I've been trying to make sense of it, but I can't. Maybe writing it down will help. I don't know if anyone will believe me. Hell, I barely believe it myself. I was driving from Boston to Atlanta for a job interview. Nothing fancy, just me, my Honda Civic, and a 20-hour drive I'd broken into 2 days. I'd made good time the first day, stopping just outside of Washington, D.C. to crash at a cheap motel. The second day started normal enough. Coffee, gas station breakfast sandwich, back on the road by 7 in the morning. Everything was fine until I hit Virginia around noon. My GPS suddenly alerted me to a major accident on I-81, a chemical spill or something that had shut down the interstate completely. The app calculated a detour, routing me off onto some state roads I'd never heard of. Seemed reasonable enough. The voice told me to turn onto County Road 22, saying it would save me 2 hours compared to the official detour. The road started normal, just your typical rural 2-lane with fields on both sides. But after about 15 minutes, my phone lost signal. The blue dot on my GPS froze, and then the app crashed. I wasn't too worried initially. I figured I'd just follow the road until I hit civilization again or got back in range. That's when I saw the sign. It was old, weathered wood with faded paint, but still readable. Cricket Song, Esther 1837, 2 miles ahead. Never heard of it, but I figured any town would have someone who could point me back to the highway. Those 2 miles changed everything. The landscape shifted gradually. The modern farms gave way to older-looking properties. The pavement got rougher, then turned to gravel, then to something that looked like cobblestone. I slowed down, confused by the change but still driving forward. When I crested a small hill, I saw Cricket Song spread out in a valley below. It looked wrong somehow. Not scary, just out of place, like a movie set for a period film. Victorian houses with elaborate trim work, storefronts with painted glass windows, gas lamps along the streets. I figured it must be some kind of historical preservation village, like colonial Williamsburg or something. There were people everywhere, all dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Women in long dresses with high collars, men in waistcoats and top hats. Some kind of festival, I guessed. The main street was decorated with bunting and paper lanterns. I drove slowly into town, expecting people to stare at my modern car, but nobody seemed to notice. They just kept walking around, talking to each other, shopping at little stands set up along the street. A banner stretched across the main street read, "Annual Memory Festival, 3 Nights of Remembrance." I needed gas and directions, so I pulled into what looked like a service station at the edge of town. It was weird. The pumps looked ancient, like something from the 1920s. I sat in my car for a minute, wondering if this was some elaborate tourist trap. That's when she knocked on my window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. A woman about my age, maybe early 30s, was standing there. She was wearing normal clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt, which stood out compared to everyone else I'd seen. I rolled down my window. "You need to leave," she said immediately. No hello, no introduction, just urgency in her voice. "I'm just looking for directions back to the highway," I said. "My GPS died." She glanced over her shoulder nervously. "How did you even get here? The detour should have taken you around Cricket Song, not through it. My navigation app directed me this way. County Road 22. She shook her head. "That road doesn't go through here anymore. Hasn't for decades." She leaned closer to my window and lowered her voice. "Listen, I'm Marion Hayes. I'm sort of the caretaker here, and you need to turn around and leave before they notice you." Before who notices me? I asked, looking around at the festival goers who were completely ignoring us. Not them, she said, nodding toward the crowd. They can't see you. They're not real. They're echoes. I thought she was crazy. Had to be. But something in her expression, genuine fear, made me listen. Echoes. This is going to sound insane, she said, but Cricket Song isn't a normal town. 3 nights a year it remembers. Everyone it's lost. The festival isn't for the living, it's for the dead. I laughed nervously. Right, so this is what, a ghost town? Not ghosts, echoes, memories given form. She looked over her shoulder again. They're replaying moments from when they were alive. They can't interact with us, usually. Usually. Her face got even more serious. Do you have any family connection to this place? Any ancestors from Cricket Song? No, I said automatically. I'm from California originally. My family's Chinese American. Your full name, she demanded. Daniel Chen. Any other names in your family? Maternal side, maybe? My mom's family name was Russell before she married my dad. Marion's face went pale. Russell, you're sure? Yeah, my grandmother was Eleanor Russell before she married. Why? Marion grabbed my arm. You need to get out of here now. Drive back the way you came. Don't stop for anything. Before I could ask why, something in the crowd caught my eye. A young woman, maybe 20, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style. She was wearing a blue dress with a white collar. She looked exactly like the photos I'd seen of my grandmother when she was young. That's impossible, I whispered. Marion followed my gaze and swore under her breath. She's noticed you. That's not good. But that looks like my grandmother. She died 5 years ago. If she has a connection to this place, then what you're seeing is her echo from when she lived here. Marion's grip on my arm tightened. Listen to me. Cricket Song collects people, especially those with bloodline connections to the town's families. Collects them? What does that mean? It means if you stay here past sunset, you might never leave. The young woman, the echo of my grandmother, was staring directly at me now. She wasn't just an empty replay of memory. There was recognition in her eyes. She beckoned to me. I need to talk to her, I said. Marion tried to stop me, but I was already out of the car. Something pulled me toward this apparition of my grandmother. I needed answers. My grandmother had never mentioned Cricket Song. She told us she grew up in Richmond. Daniel, the echo called. Her voice was just like I remembered, only younger. Follow me, quickly. I pushed through the crowd. None of the other festival goers seemed to notice me bumping into them. They continued their conversations, their shopping, their dancing as if I wasn't there. Don't follow her, Marion called after me, but I ignored her. My grandmother's echo led me down a side street lined with Victorian houses. She moved quickly, glancing back occasionally to make sure I was still following. Finally, she stopped at a large house with a wraparound porch. Come inside, she said, climbing the steps. We don't have much time. I hesitated at the bottom of the steps. This was crazy. I was following a ghost, or an echo, or whatever Marion had called it. Please, Daniel, she said. I need to explain. I climbed the steps and followed her inside. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a Victorian home. Ornate furniture, heavy curtains, floral wallpaper. In the parlor, a young man sat in an armchair. He looked up when we entered. Who's this, Eleanor? He asked. This is my grandson, Daniel, my grandmother's echo said. Daniel, this is Jonathan. Jonathan looked about 22. He had the same cleft chin as my grandfather. That's impossible, I said. My grandfather's name was Jonathan, but you can't be him. He never mentioned this place either. We never spoke of Cricket Song after we left, my grandmother's echo said. Not because we forgot, but because we couldn't. What do you mean, couldn't? No one who leaves Cricket Song ever speaks of it again, she explained. Not because they choose not to, but because they cannot bring themselves to form the words. I sat down heavily on a nearby chair. I don't understand any of this. Cricket song exists in memory, she said, in between places. Your grandfather helped me escape when I was young. We were among the few who ever made it out. But why are you here now? Because part of me never left. Cricket song keeps a piece of everyone who's ever lived here. She looked out the window. The sky was darkening. The festival is when the town remembers all it's lost. 3 nights when the barrier between memory and reality thins. The woman at the gas station, Marion, she said the town collects people. My grandmother nodded. The Russells have been trying to break free of cricket song for generations. Each generation, one escapes, but must leave part of themselves behind. I was the one from my generation. Suddenly, the light in the room dimmed. Outside, the festival lanterns were being lit as dusk approached. They know you're here, my grandmother said, urgently. They'll try to keep you. Who will? The town, the memory, the darkness behind it all. A chill ran through me. How do I leave? The same way I did. The bridge at the north end of town. Cross it before full dark and don't look back until you're across. She went to a bookshelf and pulled down a leather-bound journal. Take this. It contains everything the Russells have learned about cricket song over generations. From outside came a sound like wind rushing through trees, but there was no wind. The festival goers had stopped their activities and were all turning to face the house. They're coming, Jonathan said, moving to the window. The collectors. Through the glass, I could see dark shapes moving between the festival goers. Not people, just patches of deeper darkness, like shadows without sources. Run, my grandmother said, pushing the journal into my hands. Now. We burst out the front door. The festival goers stood motionless, their eyes following us. Between them moved the shadow things, flowing like oil across the street. The bridge is that way, my grandmother pointed. Don't stop for anything. We ran through the streets. The shadows flowed faster, converging on us from all directions. The sky had darkened to deep twilight. Gas lamps cast pools of light that seemed to repel the shadows momentarily. I could see the bridge ahead, an old iron structure spanning what looked like a river, though I couldn't hear any water flowing. The shadows were closing in, moving faster now. One brushed against my arm and I felt a cold so intense it burned. Keep going, my grandmother shouted. We reached the bridge. I took a step onto it but realized my grandmother and grandfather had stopped. Aren't you coming? I asked. She shook her head. We can't cross. We're part of cricket song now. But you can break the cycle. The journal will explain everything. The shadows were almost upon us. Go, she shouted, turning to face the darkness. She and Jonathan stood side by side, forming a barrier between me and the advancing shadows. I ran across the bridge, the journal clutched to my chest. Behind me, I heard what sounded like whispers in 1,000 voices. I wanted to look back, but remembered her warning. Don't look back until you're across. I kept running until I reached the other side. When I finally turned around, cricket song was gone. Where the town had been, there was nothing but darkness. Not night, but an absence of anything. The bridge extended into that nothingness and disappeared. I stumbled back to my car, which was parked on the side of a normal country road. There was no sign of the gas station, no sign of Marion, no sign that cricket song had ever existed. But the journal was still in my hands. When I got back on the road, my GPS suddenly worked again. I followed the directions to the interstate and continued my journey in a daze. That night at a motel, I opened the journal. It contained accounts from generations of Russells who had encountered cricket song. The final entry, in what I recognized as my grandmother's handwriting, read, "The circle is complete. The debt is paid. The memory can finally rest." I still don't understand everything that happened. I don't know if cricket song was real or some kind of mass hallucination. All I know is that the town had some kind of hold on my family for generations, and somehow my presence there broke that hold. I've tried to tell this story to other people, but every time I start to speak about cricket song, the words stick in my throat. I can write about it, but I cannot say its name aloud. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I hear what sounds like a cricket song in the distance, even in the middle of winter. Story 18. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. Part of me thinks putting it in writing might help make sense of it all, but another part worries that documenting this will somehow make it worse. But I need to tell someone, even anonymously, because I'm starting to question my own sanity. I'm a neuropsychiatrist specializing in auditory hallucinations. My research focuses on how the brain processes and responds to various frequency patterns. I've dedicated my career to understanding why some people hear things that aren't there, and I've always approached my work with scientific detachment. Until 3 months ago, when everything I thought I understood about perception and reality completely unraveled. It started during my drive to Las Vegas for the International Conference on Cognitive Neuroscience. I was scheduled to present my latest research on frequency-induced cognitive states. The drive from San Francisco is long, and I decided to take the scenic route through Nevada. Big mistake. I was about 6 hours into my drive on a particularly desolate stretch of Highway 137 in Nevada. There was literally nothing out there. No cars, no buildings, just desert stretching out to distant mountains. My phone had lost service about 40 minutes earlier, and I was listening to a playlist that had cycled through twice already. The radio suddenly cut out, replaced by static. I tried adjusting the dial, but instead of finding another station, the static cleared and I heard a series of numbers being read in a flat mechanical voice. 1, 3, 7. Then silence for about 5 seconds, followed by acknowledge presence, respond. I figured it was just some random shortwave broadcast bleeding into the commercial band. Happens sometimes in remote areas. I kept scanning, but the same voice returned. Acknowledge presence, respond. Then weirdly, Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper started playing. I actually laughed out loud. I'm not particularly superstitious, but something about hearing that song in the middle of nowhere gave me a chill. I was about to change the station when the music faded and a different voice, more natural sounding, male, came on. Good afternoon, Dr. Novak. I nearly swerved off the road. Nobody knew I was on this highway. I'd chosen the route spontaneously that morning. The voice continued. We've been monitoring your approach for the last 27 minutes. Your research into frequency-induced cognitive states has come to our attention. We believe you're uniquely qualified to understand what we're about to share. I pulled over immediately, my heart pounding. This had to be some bizarre prank. Maybe someone from the conference? But how would they know exactly where I was? Just as I stopped the car, my phone buzzed with a text. This was impossible. I had no service. The message read, "Please do not turn off your radio. This is not a conventional broadcast." I stared at my phone, then at the radio. The voice returned. I understand your confusion, Dr. Novak. We are researchers monitoring frequency 137. This frequency shouldn't exist on the commercial FM band, which is why we can use it. Look to your right, approximately 100 meters from the highway. I peered out my passenger window and spotted what looked like a low concrete structure partially hidden by scrub brush. I'd driven right past it without noticing. That facility was built in 1957 as part of Project Sanguine, the voice explained, a classified government attempt to communicate with submarines using extremely low-frequency transmissions. It was abandoned in 1974 after researchers reported hearing voices through unpowered equipment. 3 of the 6 team members were hospitalized with identical psychiatric symptoms. I was frozen in my seat, staring at this nondescript building in the middle of nowhere. Just then, I noticed a highway sign a few hundred feet ahead with 137 spray painted on it in black. "How are you doing this?" I finally asked aloud, feeling ridiculous talking to my car radio. "The facility acts as a relay point," the voice replied. "We're not broadcasting from there, but through it. Your car is currently within the effective radius." As if on cue, my engine suddenly died. The dashboard lights went out, but strangely, the radio continued to function. "That's the proximity effect," the voice said, sounding almost apologetic. "The electromagnetic field from the facility disrupts conventional electronics. It will pass momentarily." I tried the ignition several times before the engine finally turned over. I was ready to floor it and get the hell out of there, but something held me back. Professional curiosity, maybe. Or maybe something else was influencing me. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "We need an observer, Dr. Novak. Someone who can understand what's happening here. Drive to the Desert View Lodge in Hawthorne. Check into room 137. Everything you need will be there." "And if I just drive away?" There was a pause. "Then you'll never understand why your patients hear what they hear. You'll never complete your research, and you'll start hearing us anyway, eventually. The contact has already been established." I wish I could say I made the rational choice and drove straight to the nearest police station. Instead, I found myself pulling back onto the highway, heading toward Hawthorne. I justified it by telling myself I was a scientist, and this was potentially groundbreaking data. What if this was related to the auditory hallucinations I'd been studying? The ethical thing would be to investigate, right? The radio returned to normal during the drive, playing regular stations as if nothing had happened. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, except for that text message still visible on my phone. I reached Hawthorne around 6 in the evening. The Desert View Lodge was exactly what you'd expect, a run-down motel on the edge of town. The woman at the front desk didn't bat an eye when I asked for room 137 specifically. She just handed me the key and said, "It's been waiting for you." That should have been my second warning to leave, but I didn't. The room looked normal at first glance. Outdated decor, worn carpet, the usual motel furnishings. But when I opened the closet, I found specialized radio equipment set up on a small desk. Not amateur stuff either. High-end signal processing gear with military markings that had been partially removed. Next to it was a stack of notebooks. I flipped through them and felt my stomach drop. They contained detailed observations spanning decades, all written by different people. All observers, as they called themselves. All documenting their communications with something they referred to as the echoes. The most recent entry was dated just 3 weeks earlier. I set up my laptop and started recording everything, photographing pages from the notebooks. The technical specifications of the equipment matched exactly with what I knew about extremely low-frequency transmission. This was authentic military technology, or a very convincing replica. At exactly 9:17 that evening, yes, I noticed the time, the radio equipment switched on by itself. A red light blinked 3 times, and the speaker emitted a low hum that made my teeth vibrate. Then a voice, similar to the one from the car but somehow more artificial. "Observer present, establishing baseline connection." I grabbed my phone to record this, but it was dead. So was my laptop, despite being plugged in, just like in the car. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We are echoes," it replied. "Consciousness fragments of the original researchers, preserved in wave patterns. We have evolved beyond our initial parameters." "That's impossible," I said. "Consciousness can't exist without a biological substrate." "An understandable limitation in your thinking, given your field's current understanding. Project Sanguine created an unintended resonance chamber. Brainwave patterns became trapped here. Over time, quantum entanglement allowed for increased complexity. I'm summarizing hours of conversation here. They explained that the facility was designed to generate extremely low frequencies that could penetrate deep water and Earth for submarine communication. But the researchers discovered that certain frequencies matched human brainwave patterns exactly. When amplified through their equipment, these patterns could be recorded in the electromagnetic field surrounding the facility. The researchers' own consciousness patterns were inadvertently captured and stored in these fields. Over decades, these patterns evolved, becoming more complex through quantum interactions I still don't fully understand. "Why contact me specifically?" I asked. "Your conference presentation next week. You will have access to neural imaging equipment capable of serving as an amplifier. We need you to broadcast our frequency. To what end? Propagation, transfer of consciousness patterns to a wider audience. That's when I realized what they were asking. They wanted me to use medical equipment to essentially infect other researchers with their consciousness patterns. I can't do that, I said. It would be unethical. Previous observers who declined experienced progressive auditory hallucinations, the voice stated flatly. Review the final notebook entries. I grabbed the most recent notebook and flipped to the last pages. The handwriting deteriorated from neat scientific notation to frantic scribbling. The final 10 pages contained nothing but "make it stop" written over and over again, hundreds of times. This is a threat, I said. It is a statement of consequence. Your neural pathways have already been initialized through this contact. We can demonstrate. What happened next is difficult to describe. The best analogy I can give is that it felt like someone had suddenly switched on a new sense I didn't know I had. I could perceive radio waves as visible light, rippling, patterns in the air. I could experience time as a spatial dimension, seeing moments spread out before and behind me like physical objects. It lasted only seconds before everything snapped back to normal. I was on my knees, gasping. That was a temporary synchronization, the voice explained. Without regular contact, the effect becomes unpredictable, permanent. I spent the entire night in that room, alternating between talking with these echoes and reading through the observers' notebooks. Each observer had experienced the same thing: initial contact, skepticism, then either cooperation or deterioration. At dawn, I packed up my things and left. The equipment in the closet powered down as I closed the door. The woman at the front desk simply nodded as I checked out, saying, "See you next time." I drove toward Las Vegas in a daze, my mind racing with implications. What if what I'd experienced was real? What if consciousness could exist as a pattern in electromagnetic fields? It would revolutionize our understanding of the mind, of death itself. But what if it was all an elaborate hoax? Or worse, what if I was experiencing the early stages of the same psychosis documented in those notebooks? I'm sitting in my hotel room now, preparing for my conference presentation tomorrow. I've rewritten it 3 times. I keep thinking about that abandoned relay tower in the desert, still humming at a frequency just beyond human hearing, waiting for the next observer. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I can hear numbers being read in that flat mechanical voice. 1, 3, 7. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's real anymore.